Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. Kind of a special edition recruiting hour, Ryan, and we use the word hour loosely at Irish Breakdown because the first hour we'll be talking mostly about recruiting, and then we'll dive into a recruiting mailbag. We got a lot of topics for you all today. So we yesterday we talked a lot about Jaden Obsborne, and a couple hours after the show was over, Jaden Obsborne went public with the information he was going to be making a decision on August 4th. You all now know why we were so confident that he would make a decision this summer. This has been something that was in the works for a little bit. It just was about him definitely making the decision that he wanted to definitely do this. But good news for Notre Dame, Ryan, which we've talked about. We'll dive a little bit into that. We will talk about Peyton Bowen and all the rumors about him and where we think things stand. Ryan had a story this morning that came from an interview that Brian Smith actually did for us down in the Future 50 this past weekend. And, Brian and I had a very good talk about it. And Ryan obviously was able to listen to the whole interview and wrote a story from it. And then we'll talk about Ben Minich, who got offered by Notre Dame today. We'll talk about why in his game. We'll watch a little bit of film. And then we will wrap up sort of the recruiting hour with some conversation about Ronan Hanafin. We'll give the latest on where things stand recruiting-wise. Not a lot has changed, but we're going to dive into little bit about why he's important. We won't spend a lot of time with that because we've talked a lot about that already. But then we're going to do some film breakdown. We're going to show you all because Ryan and I were talking we have watched film together, he and I know we've popped up Ronan for like a thing here, a thing there, but we've never really dove into a full film breakdown of Ronan. And so we wanted to kind of, bring out his film so we can kind of show you all why we're so high on him as a player. Especially as a wide receiver. So that is going to be the topic for today. That's today's agenda, everybody. You now have an idea of what we're going to talk about. Then at the end, after all that, we're going to have a daily mailbag. So we have some questions started already. You all can start throwing in your questions if you want, and we'll get to those at the end. So Ryan, let's begin with just a kind of a little discussion, brief update on Jaden Obsborne. Obviously, we spent a lot of time on him yesterday, talked about why he's important for Notre Dame. If you didn't get a chance to listen to that, we actually cut that segment up and put it on the YouTube channel sort of as a standalone. And then we also have his film room up there as a standalone, so you can get a chance to watch those without having to watch the whole 2+ hour show again. So if you want to kind of dive into, why Ronan Hanafin is important, how he fits into the defense, you can check that out. What we're going to do today, Ryan, is we're going to talk just a little bit, just give an update about the latest with him and kind of where things stand. So obviously after we talked about him yesterday, some news came out and, kind of changes the view of Jaden Obsborne's recruitment from an outsider's perspective.
Yeah. I mean, obviously we've been talking a lot about Jaden because we knew that there was going to be some things turning and seeing that recruitment was potentially going to end very soon, in the near future. So it's now scheduled for August 4th that Jaden Obsborne is going to make his decision. He released the top 7, which was a pretty interesting top 7. You had teams like Michigan in there and LSU and different teams that we've talked a lot about where we think that things stand with Jaden Obsborne. And I put on the board yesterday. If you're not on the board, make sure to go to boards.irishbreakdown.com that we think that it's in a really good spot for Jaden Obsborne. And I know, Brian, we talked about this. If this one ended before the summer, we felt that Notre Dame was in a really good spot. If it starts trickling into the fall season, then that's where things get a little more hairy. But, I mean, the update is we have a cemented date, August 4th. We know Jaden Obsborne is going to make his decision between 7 schools. I think that Notre Dame is in a really good spot, and we'll know very soon in only a couple weeks now here.
His final 7 that he listed was in order of what I'm seeing here. It's not any particular order because I've seen the order different on a different post. Michigan, Auburn, Alabama, LSU, Texas A&M, Notre Dame, and Florida. He took official visits to Michigan, Auburn, Texas A&M, and Notre Dame. Those are the main players. He's visited all those schools. I think those 4 is really what it boils down to, Ryan. And I think there's a lot of different LSU, he didn't take an official to LSU, but he doesn't need to. He's been there.
Yeah.
Right.
He
literally goes to high school on that campus.
Right.
So it's an interesting one because obviously there's the in-state pull to go to LSU. But you and I said, I think we said this yesterday, because this is what happens when you and I talk on the phone. Then we do a show together. I don't remember what we said on the show or what
Everything
we said.
Blends in together.
Yeah, yep. I have the same problem with Sean and I because Sean and I talk for an hour before we then go do the RTCF show, and it's like, did we talk about that in the show? Or so LSU was just never seemed like a player there. And he's got respect for the program. Obviously, his dad played there and he's close by, but it just kind of seemed like he was always a kid that wanted to kind of get away. His brother chose a similar path. His brother, Austin, who's a 2022 defensive back, chose Auburn, despite LSU recruiting him. I think Michigan was somewhat of a factor, but a lot of the Michigan hype was just kind of what you see from Michigan reporters. They just kind of think everyone that visits is going to go there. And even whenever
it was the last visit as well, right?
Right. From a timing standpoint, but like some of the things we were hearing going into that visit, Michigan wasn't going to be a serious player, no matter how much people that cover Michigan wanted to say that.
Sure.
It was really going to come down to Auburn, A&M, and then Notre Dame is really who the players were in that recruitment. So we'll see what he decides. But as we have said for a little bit, Notre Dame's been in a really good place there. We broke down why we feel good about where Notre Dame stands yesterday, so we won't repeat that again because we want to spend more time on some things we haven't talked about a lot yet.
Sure.
But if you did miss yesterday's show, as I said earlier, you can check out the shows. We actually cut them up, so you don't have to watch the whole podcast again. We cut up those things, put them on the board. I'm going to try to do that more often when I have the time, break those things up so that way you can kind of go back and look at those individually. So Notre Dame obviously has been making a push for Jaden Obsborne. That would be a big one, despite his rankings drops, which are patently absurd. I saw today. Did you see the post on the board?
Yes.
Where the guy that made the On3 ranking said
athletic concerns. Or
about him and Drake Bowen, speed and athleticism concerns. I was like, you want to tell me that Jaden Osborne is too small? Okay, sure. Right. Sure, I can live with that. You want to tell me, there's things you could tell me that I'd say, okay, I don't agree, but I understand it. To question same with Drake Bowen, to question Drake Bowen's speed and athleticism, and to question Jaden Osborne speed and athleticism is just kind of like, I now don't care what you have to say about anything else. And that's just really bad.
It's just some people don't know how to, because I mean, the one interesting thing is that I think some people, because Jaden Osborne has shorter legs, right? So he doesn't have a crazy stride length. I think some people don't know how to determine speed compared to body composition. Right. And it's not great, man.
Yep.
Not a great take this morning.
Yep. It'd be like me saying, I'm not super high on Charles Jagusah. I just don't think he's strong enough. I don't think he's powerful enough. That would be the similarly bad take. It's like, I mean, CJ Carr, he's just not accurate enough for me. That's how I feel about those takes. But
even though that's a strength,
exactly. It is what it is. But so that's the latest on Jaden Osborne. We also want to talk about a current commit, Peyton Bowen, because there's obviously, look, the reality is Notre Dame fans are going to be worried about him until signing day, and I don't even chalk that up to BK PTSD. I don't. I get it. No. The kid's made multiple visits, and there was rumors about him taking official visits this summer, which never came to fruition, and they were never serious. At least, especially the one to Michigan, that was all clickbait propaganda. Mm-hmm. But I mean, he still is talking to other schools now. Ryan, what I want to dive into is kind of give a little insight as to why we are not as worried about him, because on the surface, this looks a lot like what happened last year with Amorian Walker. And last summer with Amorian Walker, I kept saying time and time again, I don't care what this kid says to Notre Dame, this kid is not going to sign with Notre Dame. And he did. The circumstances are a little different, and obviously every circumstance is different. So we wanted to share with you guys a little bit as to why we're so confident. At least, for now. I mean, if we see the same thing in the fall, he makes 2 trips to see Oklahoma. If he goes to the Texas A&M barbecue or whatever the thing they're doing, is like a pool party or some nonsense.
Yeah.
If he goes to that at the end of July, okay, at that point in time. But from what we've been told, that's not what he plans to do. But we'll see how it plays out, right? But Ryan, I just wanted to give you a chance, and then if you. I may follow up afterwards just to kind of tell people kind of your conversation with Peyton, with his mom, with our other sources of why we're just at this point in time, despite understandable angst. Again, we're not ripping you off for the angst because we read the same articles. We know how this goes. Just to give an insight into why in this particular case, we're not as concerned about it as maybe we should be based on how things look from the outside.
Look, I mean, to be completely honest, me and Brian have talked in the past about the same things that you all are talking about. How locked in is he? What does the actions speak louder than the words? Like all that type of stuff. And it's very understandable to have the talking points. So fans out there and Notre Dame faithful that are talking about Peyton Bowen, it's fine. I get it. I literally have talked about it myself. In this specific case, when the rumblings are still about official visits and going to Texas A&M at the end of the month, and Oklahoma still making a strong push, and Jackson Arnold making a strong push, which is his teammate at Denton Guyer, like it's all stuff that is going to make you kind of sit back and be like, is this legitimate? Everybody that I've talked to, and I talked to someone that's closer to the Oklahoma side of everything, they maintain that this is Notre Dame's one to lose. Like
right.
it would be a massive upset to flip him from Notre Dame at this point.
And I want to reiterate, that's an opinion Ryan is forming from a source he has that's linked to the Oklahoma program.
Right.
I just want to make sure that we're clear on that.
Yep. So if and we know how a lot of media is that's pertinent to a specific team. They're very like, oh yeah, and I think they have a good chance to flip him. It's a very optimistic view, right? I don't think that Oklahoma's in that side is that as optimistic. Texas A&M's an interesting conversation, but either way, right now, I don't think there's too much to worry about. Right. And I think it's also very encouraging that Notre Dame continues to hit home runs in Texas. We talked about up to 4 guys now committed from the state of Texas. And then also, Brian, I mean, in the recent article I wrote, Peyton Bowen is an active recruiter in this 2023 Notre Dame class. And I know there's probably been some examples that you can point to in the past for various programs about guys that were active, but then they flipped. And I'm sure that
but it was always after a period of there was a period where you're like, okay, he's not responding. Like, for example, with Dante Moore, one of the things that we kind of knew that things had soured with Notre Dame was some of the commits we're talking about, I haven't heard from him in a little while. You know what I mean? Like there's something changes in almost every instance of a kid flipping that was involved with other commits. The way that Peyton Bowen is, there was a period where the commit started to notice this kid doesn't talk as much.
For sure.
And one of the things we talked about is, Drake Bowen and Peyton Bowen were 2 of the big reasons why Christian Gray ultimately picked Notre Dame. It was their relationship with Christian Gray that they built with him, playing games together in the chats, that served a big role to Notre Dame. So again, what he says publicly, in my opinion, is more of a really smart, respectful kid that doesn't want to disrespect programs. And this next part is 100% my opinion. My opinion. I have no sourcing on this. My opinion. I think that Drake or Peyton also has to be very careful because he has a younger brother that's going through this recruiting process. And with the way that this business is, there are going to be schools that want him that are going to try to mislead his brother or maybe punish his brother. It's a petty business, Ryan. We've seen this before. Yep. And so I think that's another delicate line that I think Peyton has to draw. And finding out like who really likes Eli and who really wants Eli because they want to get to Peyton. And I think that's the reason Notre Dame took their time offering Eli, is because they didn't want to offer Eli in the midst of all this stuff of him visiting, because they didn't want it to come across that we're only offering Eli because he's Peyton's brother. Sure. From the sources we've talked to, Notre Dame has made it very clear to the family that, look, we want Eli because we want Eli. And if, and so I think that's another, and again, that's the part about Peyton is my opinion. The part about Eli and Notre Dame liking Eli, that is intel related. Sure. But I think that has to add a lot of pressure to Peyton too. Like, because his brother hasn't made a decision yet. His brother's still open. They're not pushing him to go to Notre Dame. If he chooses to go to Notre Dame, it's because he wants to go to Notre Dame, not because they're pushing him to follow his brother. And so you have to be careful with what you're doing as Peyton, because you want to make sure that you're not doing anything to hurt your brother. Again, that's my opinion, but I think that's something we have to at least consider when you hear what he says publicly with what he says to everyone privately. Right. And that's the, that's kind of the thing for me that I look at and say, the conversations that he has with other recruits, the conversations that we hear from sources that his mother has with other parents, all those things, are now. Does that mean that he is 100% locked in and committed to Notre Dame and there's no way he flips anywhere else? We're not saying that. Look, because again, as long as a kid, it's one thing for him to say things, but if he goes and visits other places moving forward, that is going to be a cause for concern. So we're going to be honest about it. If he takes visits in the fall, we'll be more concerned. If he doesn't, then, then we'll feel the same way that we do now. So that's where things are at.
Yeah. Well, and I think the last layer that you hit on, Brian, was that I was going to also kind of comment on is the family loves Notre Dame, right? Like his mom is very adamant and very transparent about how much she loves Notre Dame. So I think that he's locked in. I think the family's locked in with the decision. I'm not worried about that at all right now. To your point, though, Peyton is a very respectable young man who is, I think that he's one of those kids that is just he's very thankful for all the schools that have recruited him. So he returns the calls, he returns the texts, he, talks to them. This isn't a point where he's just like, I'm not answering the phone anymore. And that's not necessarily a negative. It's just, it makes you think that things are a little more open than maybe they particularly are. So this is going to be one where you're not going to feel 100% or complete ease until Peyton ultimately does sign with Notre Dame. But for now, like you said, if things change in the fall as far as visits and all that conversation does, I'm going to think a little bit differently. But based upon everything I've heard recently and the interview he also did with Brian Smith, I'm not worried about Peyton Bowen not being in the class right now. Just
right. I think the family part you have to talk about. Somebody brought up like Dante Moore and Maureen Walker. First of all, I said all summer last summer that Notre Dame wasn't going to get Maureen Walker. So they're completely different scenarios. The difference between Dante Moore and in this instance is Moore's family didn't want him to go to Notre Dame. That's a difference between Peyton Bowen. So, and the same thing with the Moore and Walker. So you have to look at every circumstance uniquely and differently. And that's the reality of it. So as long as he continues to, because here's the other thing, somebody else brought up another point too. If his family's going on a trip somewhere with Eli, is he supposed to just stay home?
Exactly.
Right.
It's a great point. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's another aspect of it. So we'll see how it goes, but that's kind of that's why we are calm. Now, look, as we said at the beginning, we understand why people feel differently. I get it. I mean, I don't chalk that up to BK PTSD. When a kid goes to another campus, that's a concern. Right. And so, and Peyton has visited Alabama since I think his Notre Dame visit, I believe. Didn't he go to Alabama after the Notre Dame visit?
Yeah.
There's talk about him going to this thing or that thing. Those are all legitimate concerns if he follows through with those visits. If he then takes visits in the fall, but even then, it's like, is he taking a visit because of Eli, or is he taking a visit with Eli, or is this where he's being recruited? It's a very interesting situation. And at some point in time, these schools are going to have to start saying, okay, if we want Eli, do we then try to recruit Peyton while he's here? Then maybe that hurts us with Eli. It's a very strange situation when you have two brothers that are a year apart.
Yes.
Agree. So, and then that's kind of where that is. Now let's move on to this other one. People saying that Ben Minich's offer has to do with Peyton Bowen. It's not even remotely close to being accurate. This is what we've been told all along. Ben Minich visited Notre Dame or camped at Notre Dame this summer and looked really good. At the time, Notre Dame was wanting a third safety. Now, I think we could debate whether a third safety is a need. After some things I've learned recently, I understand why a third safety is a need, not a want, because we had said earlier, Ryan, it was more of a want than a need.
Yeah.
I think now it's going to be more of a need, just because of how the roster is going to shake out with certain players. This is about Caleb Downs, not Peyton Bowen. If they offer another safety along with Ben Minich, then you get worried about Peyton Bowen, or it being because of Peyton Bowen. This has nothing to do with Peyton Bowen. This has to do with they gave their best shot to Caleb Downs. It's very obvious now that they're not getting him. He's going to go to either Alabama, Georgia, or Ohio State. That's just the reality of it.
Yep.
So this is a move that has to do with that. And that's why it's coming when it is. And so I'm just telling you what our sources in every single aspect of this have told us. This was about Caleb Downs. This is something we've been told weeks ago could happen. It actually happened a little bit earlier than I thought. I thought they were going to offer him when he visited, because we anticipate him visiting soon. But they decided to offer him beforehand.
Sure.
So it's an interesting move. We're going to talk about Ben a little bit as a player. But obviously, people are going to start drawing parallels that are just inaccurate. And you can take it for however you want to take it. But the reality is this has nothing to do with Peyton Bowen. This has everything to do with Caleb Downs, because as we saw, Notre Dame look, you're going to miss kids sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
As I sit back and I say, I think there are some things that we could get into, and maybe we'll have this discussion on the premium board at some point in time. Like, I think maybe there are things you could have maybe done differently with Jason Moore. I do. And we'll dive into that.
Sure.
With Caleb Downs, I don't know what else Notre Dame could have done. Sometimes you're just going to put everything you have and you do a great job and the kid loves you. He just likes other people more. And I think that's kind of what happened with Caleb Downs. So this is where Ben Minich's offer is coming from, Ryan. It's about Caleb Downs, not Peyton Bowen.
Yeah, and I understand why some people look at it, Brian, and they do make that parallel to Peyton Bowen, because that's a talking point, right? Recently, it's like, oh, is Peyton, again, for the 20th time this offseason, is Peyton Bowen locked in? Is he looking at other schools? Yada, yada, yada. The conversation gets brought up, and then pretty shortly after, this morning, Ben Minich gets offered. So you're kind of like, oh, that must be a direct correlation to Peyton Bowen. But I love that you kind of painted this picture. It's not about Peyton Bowen. It's simply they're not going to get Caleb Downs. And it stinks. I mean, again, he's a 5-star, top 10 caliber player in the country, in my opinion, Caleb Downs, and in a couple other recruiting services opinions as well. He's a fantastic player. You gave your best shot. Nothing to feel bad for if you're Notre Dame. I mean, literally, it was always going to be an uphill battle, and they battled until the end. Let's give them credit for that, man. It was always going to be tough getting Caleb Downs out of the Southeast. I don't think he's going to go to Ohio State personally. I think he's going to end up at Alabama or Georgia. We'll see what the final verdict is. But this one is Notre Dame wants a third safety. They're not going to get Caleb Downs, and they have identified Ben Minich as that third safety. And this is something also with the timing thing. Like you said, Brian, we heard about this weeks ago, that they were doing the evaluation of him. They were taking a look at him. And when he checked those boxes, sort of like Joe Otting, right? Like the sizing him up and just trying to check those boxes. The minute he did that, they liked him, right? So, I mean, not that they liked him, they kind of just checked that final box for him,
right?
If that makes sense.
And you got to understand too, he was not a kid that was really on Notre Dame's radar as an offerable player until he came to camp in June. That's the other aspect of it, is he earned the opportunity to get an offer depending on how things shook out. So that's the other thing you have to consider is if he doesn't camp at Notre Dame this summer, and it wasn't an Irish Invasion, it was a different camp, and test and work out and do the things in front of the staff the way he did, he doesn't have an offer right now. They'd be going in a different direction. Now, we'll dive into the film. I got to see his senior film. I view him right now, if I'm just being honest, as a good football player, but more of a Purdue, Indiana, Cincinnati type of football player. Now, again, Cincinnati just beat Notre Dame, but it's not that, it's a different situation. But I view him as a good football player that is a Big Ten caliber guy, but a Purdue, Indiana, Minnesota, Illinois type of Big Ten player. Mm-hmm. Now, what I was told is that's kind of was Notre Dame's opinion as well, which is why they didn't offer and why he had to come to camp to earn it. He tested extremely well, performed very well at the camp, and that's why Notre Dame likes him. I didn't see that, so I can't change my opinion based on camp. Number one, I'm that's just not how I operate unless I see every single drill a kid had. So I've got to see the senior film, and we'll be open to it, just like I was when Adon Schuler committed after his sophomore year. I said, he's a good player, but I got questions about the athleticism and all that, but I'll be open-minded about it because he does have some other traits I like.
Sure.
I saw instincts. I saw hitting. And I see a lot of that in Ben Minich. I see a kid that's instinctive, makes a lot of plays, but I don't see a Notre Dame caliber athlete on film. And that's how I felt about Adon Schuler after a sophomore when he committed to Notre Dame. But we were told then he had a great camp. He tested better. And so I said, okay, I'll be open-minded to see what he does in the fall. And then you went and saw that athleticism jump on the football field. And so now our opinion of Adon Schuler is much higher. So you always have to be open to it, but we're also not the type that all of a sudden, just because Notre Dame offered, we think he's a better player. You know what I mean? Like, I got to see the film. That's the reality of it. We got to see the film and see how he projects and how he progresses and all those type of things. But Notre Dame likes him, and that's why it was. And there was a comment from Brandon that I want to address too. Brandon says, "Why didn't the staff pursue King Mack?" Now, that's a question that I've raised to Ryan publicly. I'd try to go flip King Mack. I love King Mack. The concern that Notre Dame has always had about King Mack is size. So he's like 5'9", 5'10", and that's the concern. Now, I don't care. He's a playmaker and a burner, and I would always want to get into St. Thomas Aquinas down in Florida. That's just my opinion.
Penn State got a really good one with
yes,
King Mack. No doubt about it.
Big pickup. Now, I would have tried to flip him, but the staff isn't as high on King Mack as I am. The other thing, too, Brandon, to your question, because it's a very fair question, especially with how high I am on a guy like King Mack, the timing is also different. And this is what I want to make clear from what I said at the beginning, just because I've said it and kind of moved on from it. Mm-hmm. When sort of the spring started from a recruiting standpoint, a third safety wasn't necessarily a need. Then they went through spring ball. The roster shakes out certain ways. Some guys that maybe they thought were going to be at safety didn't perform as well. Maybe some guys, and I'm kind of thinking of the freshman class here with Jaden Bellamy, that they thought could play safety, maybe projects more as a slot outside corner type of player. Yeah. And that's saying that for a reason, right? And so I think the situation has changed as well. Also, there are certain players on the board they wanted at positions that they had already met their need that they didn't get. Biggest thing is the lines. They wanted 4 linemen and 5 linemen, 4 on defense and 5 on offense. But there were 2 players they would have taken to get past that. Monroe Freeling, they're out with now. So they're not going to take a 6th offensive lineman. And now that Jason Moore's off the board, they're not going to take a 5th defensive lineman. So now that has opened up another safety spot even more, to where with Caleb Downs, it was, we're going to take Caleb Downs because he's too good not to take.
Sure.
And you could have made it work. Now it's the third safety becomes a need, and there's additional room. Because remember, when the spring started, we were talking about leading for Jason Moore at the time, leading for Dante Moore at the time, leading for other players. You started looking and saying, like, boy, they're going to get up to 27. And, you look at it and say, you got to be careful about the new offers you're putting out. Well, now it's looking more like 25. So there's now room. And now you can feel better about taking a kid like Ben Minich, who projects as a safety, but at the very least is going to be a really good special teams player for you. And bring some two-way value. We talk a lot about two-way value. He actually, some of his film at receiver looks even better to me than his film on defense at times. And I think part of the thing too, I got to try to watch him this fall, because part of the thing too is when you watch him, he's always playing next to Malik Hartford. And that hurts because like you're looking at like, that's the dude that Notre Dame, that's the kind of guy Notre Dame should be going after, Malik Hartford, who's committed to Ohio State. And then you watch Ben Mitch, like, yeah, he's a good football player, but he's not that guy, right? And that's something I think hurts my evaluation of Ben Minich as well. So I'm going to keep an open mind about him. And again, he's a good football player. He's a Purdue, Indiana type of guy based on film I see right now. He's also a really smart kid. He has offers from Princeton, Harvard, and Yale. So that fits as well. But it's the Notre Dame's evaluation is again based on stuff that we haven't seen. And so I'm trying to be honest about what we think about him and not change that view because Notre Dame has now offered him, but also to say, but I want to be, Ryan is going to be, and we want all of you to be open-minded to see if what we're being told about him and his jump and athleticism then shows up on film. He was reported as having run a 10.47 in the 100. That was wind aided. His times are consistently in the 10.7s and 10.8s, which is good, but that's more like, mid to high 4.5-ish type of good. Maybe a low 4.5 type of good. It's not like 4.4 type of good. But his other athletic numbers check out well. Those are all good things. I'm going to be open-minded about it. But just right now, he's a guy that I look at and say, that's a depth player for now, right? Assuming Notre Dame, we don't even know if definitely Notre Dame's going to get him. He's got to visit and all that kind of stuff, and we'll kind of see how it goes. But that's kind of where we are at this point in time. And so somebody said, look, folks, we got to chill out a little bit. This is not a desperation offer. Notre Dame is far from being in that situation. Sometimes it's okay for us to say they like him more than I do.
Sure.
Without it being a desperation thing or,
I don't understand how it's a desperation thing when you have Peyton Bowen and Adon Schuler already in the class. Right. I don't get how that's a desperation.
Well, I think that's probably coming from, and I'm speaking for someone, this may not be their reasoning, but I think part of it is because people who still think Peyton Bowen is going to leave the class are going to never view this as anything other than a fear about Peyton Bowen, which I understand. I actually understand that.
Sure.
I do.
Sure. Yeah,
I do.
I get that.
I do.
I would say this about Ben Minich is the reason that I am kind of keeping my eye open to it is I have not seen the kid in person. And this would be one of the kids, Brian, for me, of the offers on the board that I would most like to see in person, because I have a feeling that he might be a player that is a lot more impressive athletically in person than he is on film.
Mm-hmm.
And because we mentioned it, Notre Dame needed to see him in person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that was like the
His
point
film
where you're
didn't
like,
blow them
yes,
away either. Right.
100%. It was the fact of eyeing him up, see him in person, seeing the athleticism work in front of your eyes.
Right.
There are some players that do not pop on film. That doesn't mean they're not a good football player.
Right.
It means that there's some part of your game that you appreciate more in person than you do on film.
Right.
So, yeah.
So we'll find out, right? And we'll definitely see how this all pans out. So his film is definitely going to be some of the first I watch early in the fall. We'll put it that way. There's no question about it. But I do want to emphasize, look, we are confident with where Notre Dame is right now in Peyton Bowen. That could change if he continues to take more visits, but as of right now, that's where he's at. We like Ben Minich as a player. I think he's a good Big Ten caliber player, but not necessarily a Notre Dame, Ohio State caliber guy. Notre Dame, he really earned an offer this summer, which means I got to see what his fall film is. Now, he checked in about 6 foot tall, over 180 pounds. Testing numbers were good this summer, and then he, of course, blew it away in drills. So we will see kind of how it plays out. But when look, here's the deal. Somebody kind of here's kind of a thing for me too, Ryan. That somebody said this. I want to pull this up. 9M problems with BK1. Also, Brian, you were pretty clear often that you'd put more weight on the staff's evaluation than yours or anyone else's. Doesn't make them right, but they have earned the benefit of the doubt so far. I don't put anyone's evaluation over my own, just because if I don't trust my own evaluation enough, I shouldn't have an opinion on a guy, right?
Sure.
It's more of but I get where you're coming from, 99, but it's more of there are people that were on the previous staff that I didn't care what they thought about a prospect. Didn't care. I didn't trust their evaluation. What I have learned about several members of this coaching staff is that for example, I won't get into that because then anyway, not going to go there. I was about to open up a can of worms. What we talked about yesterday.
Is this an IB tailgate conversation?
No. It's just not even worth getting into at this point in time. We'll see how it plays out. But like with Marcus Freeman, with Al Washington, what I know of Al Washington, with Mike Mickens, for example, I'm with Dylan McCullough, who's been coaching running backs at a high level for a long time. If Dylan McCullough likes a kid that I don't love, Jaden Lamar is a perfect example. Mm-hmm. Notre Dame likes Jaden Lamar more than I do.
Sure.
And I'm honest about what my evaluation is, but I'm also open to, okay, I trust that guy's analysis of running backs. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and be open-minded to seeing more of that kid. That's part of the reason I hired Ryan, to be honest with you. Do I trust Ryan's evaluations more than mine? No. Does Ryan trust my evaluation more than his? I hope not, because I want that conviction, but it's about having enough respect for someone else and what they've proven to say, you know what, I'm going to take a second look at this kid, which is I've been open about was what I did with Jaden Obsborne. So I think it's more that. It's just there's more I've known Al Golden for over 20 years. Now, I've only met him a couple times in passing at different coaching clinics and things like that, but I've known him, I've known of him. We recruited the same schools. I've studied, with what he did at Virginia back in the day and what he did at Temple. I know that guy knows how to evaluate film. So if that kid tells me he thinks a kid can play, and I don't like the kid, I'm going to give the kid a second look. So it's more about that. So with Ben Minich, because if I trusted their evaluation more than mine, I would be standing here saying, this would be a great pickup. This offer makes total sense. This kid can play at Notre Dame. Because why? Because Marcus Freeman and Chris O'Leary and Al Golden said so. That's not what we're saying. What I am saying, however, I trust this staff enough, especially Chris O'Leary. I won't say that about because I just don't know enough about him. Same thing with Chancey Stuckey. I wouldn't say that I trust Chancey Stuckey's evaluation more than mine because I don't know enough about him as an evaluator to say that about. Mike Mickens I trust because of his track record going all the way back to Bowling Green.
Sure.
And different things like that. So that's where it comes from. But it's It's like there's enough of the coaches that I trust to say, I'm going to be open-minded to see what this kid does in the fall. Now, if we see him in the fall, Ryan, and he's the same guy that we saw on junior film, then I'll say, look, I think there's better players they could have got. Sure. But right now, there's a lot of uncommitted safeties on the board that Notre Dame has offered. Why him?
Right.
They see something in him from a player standpoint and also from a fit standpoint too. Because that's the thing is, he's your third safety, meaning it's a chance he's going to come in and not be a starter. It takes a different type of personality, a versatility, a success in other areas. It's going to lead to him being the fit.
Right.
And so that's why I look at it and I say, hey, this is a guy that, okay, I understand it, right? And that's really where I want to get to. But we can't really say that definitively until we get to the fall and see what he does on film. I hope that answers the question, 99. It's a very fair thing to say. And I think you're accurate to say that there's definitely a higher level of respect for the evaluation of the current coaching staff than I did of the past coaching staff. Even some of the coaches I liked, I often didn't agree with their analysis of players. I liked Mike Elson. I thought Mike Elson did a very good job at Notre Dame. Very good job. And, but I had a lot more disagreements with him on evaluations than I have had so far with guys on the current staff. It's just he liked certain things. I just thought Notre Dame should have done better. And we'll see if this is a similar situation, right? So very fair question, but I wanted to address it because I think it's a very good comment to bring up. So Ryan, next I want to talk about quarterback. So Austin Novosad. So obviously there's been some things that have happened. We're going to update people on that. We're not going to talk a lot about Austin as a player. We've already done that. But there's some potential moving parts here that we wanted to get people caught up on.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously he was on Irish Players Club yesterday, and he mentioned something about, visiting it at some point. So I reached out to someone because I'd reached out to Austin a couple of times, and it's just kind of been a work in progress to get up to Notre Dame, like figuring out scheduling and getting up because it's a shorter window, obviously, for trying to get up to Notre Dame because he still wants to make a decision before summer ends. Like he wants to make it, right? So reached out to someone close to him. Tentatively, they are trying for the last week of July. So near the barbecue date, which is the 26th. So right around that date, they are trying to make it work. It is not something that is cemented, but it is something that is likely to happen. Yeah. So we do not have the official dates. We do not know how long he's going to stay. We don't have any of that information, but they are shooting for that last week in July. Looks like that is most likely going to be the window that they're going to be able to visit Notre Dame.
And I think right now it's safe to say that the question is more of when in that window he visits. It's not so much if he's going to visit. I don't think that's as much of a question right now, unless things change between now and then. It's more of a when. It's not definitely going to be on the day of the barbecue. And honestly, I think it's probably smarter to not have it be on the day of the barbecue. Yeah. And this is a kid you're trying to land. This is a quarterback, and you've got one shot at this because he has said he wants to make his decision before the fall. He has been very clear. I don't have the relationship with the Notre Dame staff that I have with others because they just got involved later.
Sure.
That's just the way that it is. So I don't know if I want him splitting time with all the other studs that are going to be on campus and some of the kids that you like in the 2024 class. I think it'd be best if you can to have him on a different date where you can sit him down and Tommy Rees can spend all day with him if he wants to spend all day with Coach Rees. He can sit down and do all these things without having to worry about his schedule around other players. So I actually think it would be smart for Notre Dame to not bring him in on that date if it's possible. But I think that's where we're at. I think we can safely say it's a matter of when in that schedule, not if he'll make it that week is where things stand right now. The question I have, Ryan, is yep. I think this next week for him, week plus, depending on when he comes, is going to be the make or break period for Notre Dame in his 100%. Recruitment. 100%. You've got several days to kind of continue closing that gap, getting him in a frame of mind where you can potentially win him over when he gets on campus. If you can't, it's like this, just plain and simple. If you aren't his leader by the time he leaves campus next week, you're not going to get him. You have to at least pull even with everybody else. Then you can maybe pull ahead afterwards, but you're not going to be behind Ohio State, A&M, and Baylor coming in, which I think is somewhat safe to say because there's just the unknown. He's been to those places. He hasn't been to Notre Dame. So I don't care how much he likes Notre Dame. you can't say he's, in this particular instance, other kids it's different, but you can't say that they're definitely, there's leader. I've had people say if he visits, they're going to get him. Maybe.
Right.
But I think there's a closing that has to happen, because I do think going in, at least two of those schools are, I wouldn't say they lead Notre Dame, but he's more comfortable with them. Is that a fair way to say it, Ryan?
No, it's very fair.
So coming out of that visit, you have to have pulled ahead. So it doesn't just happen, though, during the visit. It's going to be all leading up to it. And you could tell from his comments, it's Tommy Rees, it's Marcus Freeman, it's Chad Bowden, it's the whole staff is working. And the recruits, the Notre Dame commits, are working hard with him. There's no doubt about it.
I'm going to use a baseball analogy real quick, right? So this one is in the 8th inning. You're tied up. You have the runner at third, 2 outs. You're trying to get that single in to go up by 1 run going into the 9th so that you can close the game out, right? This is where you are. This isn't necessarily the last chance, but this is a chance to pull ahead, right? Because there's always going to be ground that could be made up by other teams. If he visits another school, who knows what's going to happen after the Notre Dame visit. But you have to go into the 9th inning feeling good about your chances, because there's going to be other opportunities over the phone, continuing to build those relationships. But this is big, because this is the first time he'll be in Notre Dame, first time he'll see these coaches in person. So they need to knock it out of the park, quite literally. So little baseball analogy for you, but I think it's really important, to Brian's point. You need to hit away here, right? Like you need to your best foot forward. You need to put everything out there. Coach Rees and the rest of this staff, Coach Freeman, if this is really the player that they want, Austin Novosad, you need to come out of this visit feeling like you are at least in the conversation, right? Like you need to be able to close the game out in the 9th.
Yeah. And it would be big. I mean, you saw him get a big rankings bump recently. I think 247 put him in the top 100. And then I don't remember where he was ranked before. I know he wasn't in their top 247. I'm pretty sure of that. And then On 3 put him inside the top 200. And then Rivals has him, I think, like around like 136, if I remember correctly, Ryan. I think Rivals has him there.
Yeah, it's
I'm
somewhere
actually
around there.
Pulling up his rankings now, and I don't think ESPN has really updated him since the rank. Yeah, he's still a 3-star on ESPN, but yeah, he's 136 on Rivals, 89 on 247 Sports, and 188 on 3. A week ago, he's not ranked that high by all of them. He's
ascending
He's
player.
Definitely an ascending player.
Yeah.
So from a recruiting ranking standpoint, he'd be a big pickup, but Notre Dame isn't looking at Austin Novosad because they care about the recruiting rankings. They think this kid can play. And yeah, the Texas aspect helps, but they think he can play. And I think that's kind of where it is. So you've got to play this one out and see how it feels, how it goes. And then depending on how it goes, there's other options on the board, which we've talked about, that Notre Dame likes a lot as well. It's just this one had to move a little quicker because of how everything went. So with
the timeline, yep.
Right.
Yep.
And I couldn't even say definitively that Novosad is definitely the top guy that they want. I don't know the answer to that. Right? I'm not saying he isn't. I don't know the answer to that. I haven't been told that by anybody. I just think he's obviously the higher ranked kid, which is different conversation for a different day.
Yep.
But it's just more of it's the one that needs the most conversation, because he's the one that's actively looking and is wanting to wrap things up quickly. And so I think that's part of Notre Dame's evaluation with this process as well. So it's a very interesting thing, but we're going to have closure on this one way or the other over the next month, I would say, because he said he wants to get it done before senior season.
Yep.
What we don't know, whenever a kid says that, what we don't know, unless they say it specifically, does that mean before your senior season, meaning you want to do it before your camp starts or before your first game? And that's that's different for different kids. So that's what makes it a little bit interesting at this point in time. So, Ryan, before we dive into Ronan Hanafin, I did want to spend just a few minutes kind of popping up Ben Minich's film, so we can kind of say, we want to point out these are things we like, but also these are some things that we look at and say, hey, this is where we think this young man needs to get better, and these are the things that we'll be looking for in the spring, because what you're going to see when we pop this film up, Brian, is this is a good football player. It is. I mean, if I'm telling you he's a Big Ten caliber football player, that's a good football player. The question that we're going to have is he a guy that when we look at him that is a Is he a Notre Dame guy? And that's kind of
Right.
what we think. But the one thing is he does make a lot of plays. He's like we said, he's checked in this summer, little under 6 foot, around 6 foot, I should say, excuse me, over 180 pounds. So he's definitely a guy that, a guy that can, has good size for the position. You see there, he's got some speed. He
Yep.
can run. This is a good play. He plays in Cincinnati, and if you know anything about Ohio, where he plays the Lakota West, very good level of football. They play St. X. I mean, they play a really, really challenging schedule. So that is one thing he is playing good programs. He does come from a quality level of football that I think Notre Dame needs to recruit hard. Cincinnati's an area that can be very favorable to Notre Dame and has in the past that I'd like to see the staff spend a little bit more time on.
Don't disagree. I think the things that I really do like Brian is I think that he has really good acceleration to him. I think he gets up to his top speed very quickly. And I think he's got some really nice short area quickness. Like I think this is a kid that can play like a big nickel type of role, maybe a little bit of a rover, in obvious passing situations. Like I think he has that quick twitch acceleration to him. I mean, you can see on that play, he sticks his foot in the ground and he's able to get downhill in a hurry.
Yep. I think, Ryan, I see a kid that's instinctive. I see a kid that has a good feel for the game. You see on a lot of these plays, he's kind of working through trash, getting to the ball. It's similar to what we were praising Jaden Obsborne for the other day. Like he's coming from the backside here. So he goes across the field in motion, just so you can see this. This is him kind of going across the field in motion. He ends up following it, getting across working through the trash, and then goes low and he makes a tackle. He's not a super powerful kid. That's one of the concerns I have. He doesn't, when he arrives at the ball, he doesn't necessarily come with a lot of force. He's a good tackler. This play right here shows a little bit of the instincts and feel. Again, he runs well. Does he run like you'd expect a Notre Dame DB? That's what I don't see yet on film. That's really what it boils down to for me, Ryan, is I just don't see a guy that has that elite speed. But, Jalen Elliott didn't have that either.
Right.
I think Jalen was a lot twitchier, in my opinion, than what I see from Ben Minich.
I think this kid is much more short area quickness than long speed guy, right? Like I don't think I don't think you're going to get like incredible range on the back end. Right. I think that the closer you get to the line of scrimmage, the more that he's able to work in the slot and in space, kind of a little more, to work to his strengths from a short area perspective. I think that that's kind of where he really, at least in my opinion, right now, I think that that's where he flourishes on film.
Right. I think the other thing too that I like about, or that I noticed too, Ryan, is to your point. I do like him as a potential slot guy. Yeah. He does have some fluidity there. He is a guy that can change direction relatively well. Not super twitchy, but you see right here, he's kind of working laterally, opens up, gets clean there up the seam, picks the ball off. That's a good play. That's good. Go ahead, Ryan.
It's a good job by him to get into the frame of the receiver there without interfering, though, right? Like I think there is a decent amount of technique here to kind of use his momentum against offensive players. And I mean, even like right there, you see it takes a good angle, work it inside out. I think the angles and I think his technique overall is pretty good, man. Like I think there's some good traits from a quickness and athleticism perspective from short areas. I do have questions though. I have questions over what is the upside of a player like this. Is he more than a depth player? And I'll be very honest about that, but I think he's a good football player. It's just upside, I guess, is my biggest holdup with Ben Minich.
Right. And I think part of it too is he's being punished by how good the class is. Hold on a second. If you can't be respectful, you're just not going to be here. So see ya. To me, here's why, to respond to the comment of the person who just got blocked from the channel. Here's why pop matters, because this is against high school players. And when you're watching a kid go against high school players and he's not arriving with force, when he goes against Division I players, he's going to get run over. That's why it matters. You can't just be as a safety. We're not talking about a corner here where you can just ankle tackle all day long when guys catch hitch routes, right? Yep. You're talking about a safety that's got to be able to tackle tight ends, running backs, quarterbacks. If you don't have the strength to handle playing like that, then you're going to be someone who is going to have a hard time bringing down those bigger players at the next level. And that's why it matters. And that's one of the things that I want to see from Ben as he's a senior. Again, this is junior in high school film. He's going to get stronger. Notre Dame has seen enough from him this summer to make them feel that, to feel comfortable with making that offer. So that's kind of what I see from him.
Yeah. Yeah. I also do like Brian that he plays both sides of the football, right? So like, I think that that's a big thing for like ball skills, right? Like he's used to catching the football, which I think is another big plus for him, is that he's kind of got that all around athlete, right? Like maybe he's not a standout in every area, but I think the fact that he has an overall good profile and he put some special teams highlights on here, man, which is awesome to see, and because that is going to be a sticking point to him probably early, is if he lands with Notre Dame, he's going to have to impact special teams and be a core teamer.
Right.
And he has those highlights on film where he shows his ability to run down the football field, close on the ball. And I think that there's some good stuff on here, man. There's
the instincts in the field is really impressive. And he's a good athlete. That's why I say, like, if I'm saying that you're a Big Ten level football player, that's a good football player.
Yep.
Again, and that's what I was saying earlier. I think the thing that's hurt him is because of Notre Dame has landed such impact players and so much like starting caliber players across the board, that this guy comes in and you're like, maybe he's a rotation. Well, in the past, we've said you need guys like that. You know what I mean? So, I think that's hurting him. You know what I mean, Ryan? Like all the kids, they're like, yeah, this guy's a star. This guy's really good. This kid's a good football player. I mean, I think this clip is an example of it.
Yeah, no, and I think the athleticism is more than enough. Again, we're just trying to highlight what we see as an athlete that is, because again, I just think he's a little more quick than fast, and that's not a bad thing because there's a lot of players that are like that. Like I would say, a Loki Gilman was a guy that was quicker than he was fast, but he was still a really good safety. But he wasn't. I mean, he went to the combine and ran like 4.61 or something like that. Like he's just not the greatest athlete, but you don't always have to be when you're that instinctive.
Right. And here's kind of the thing for me, Ryan, that when I look at him, why it matters to me about the quick then fast and all that, there's all the things that to me keep me from saying right now on this film he's a Notre Dame caliber kid. All of them I can live with. It's just when you have more of them, that's when I have a little bit more of like, okay, so it's the combination of, okay, he's more quick than fast. You don't see the long range, which limits how you use him, right? So, like, what that means, what Ryan is saying, like, you're not going to see him, in my opinion, playing center field a lot. That's okay. There's a role for that.
You're not going to see him working from a ton of depth because that's an increased amount of space. You want to decrease the space with this type of player, in my opinion.
And so, that's okay. There's a role for a guy like that. Okay. Yeah. The thing for me is it's when you combine that with the fact that he doesn't arrive with a lot of force. For a safety, that's a much bigger concern for me than someone who is a corner, right? And so it's just a couple of those things. He's got decent size, but not great size, but he is an athlete, he's a very instinctive football player. And again, I see why they like him. I see why he came to camp. I just have to see on film the stuff that they saw that caused them to throw out an offer. And I think that's kind of where I'm at. And that's what I'm going to be open-minded to. So what are the things we're going to be looking for when we watch him this fall? Mm-hmm. I want to see if he does close a little bit better in the football, right? I want to see if he does have a little bit more burst. If some of the times I've been told about him are accurate, I think we're going to see him playing with a little bit more burst this fall, Ryan. If he's filled out the way that we have been told he's filled out from a size standpoint this summer, I think we could see him arrive at the football with a little bit more force. And so those are the things that we're going to talk about. But what you see is a pretty fluid athlete. You see a kid that's really he's got decent length. I mean, he's not real big, but he's got decent length. He's, 6 footish, good arm length. Those things are there. Kid makes a lot of plays on the football and makes a lot of plays on the football for a kid who also plays with one of the best safeties in the country, in Malik Hartford.
Yes. Yep.
So, that's going to be part of it as well. And he's also a kid that I think brings a little bit of, if he can't play safety and a need arrives at receiver, he could play receiver as in a rotation role as well.
Sure.
And we always talk about how important it is to have versatility. I think the fact that he could be an alley safety and a slot combined with a special teams player, combined with he could help you at receiver in a pinch, are all things that work in Ben Minich's favor. And
Yeah.
and those things you really value if you're going to have a depth player in a class. And that's our opinion. That's not Notre Dame's opinion, right? We're not,
Sure.
or I don't know what their opinion is from that regard. I just want to make sure we're clear that that's our opinion of him. If you're going to have a depth player in a 25-man class ish, he's got to be a guy that brings some versatility. And that's something that that's something that I like about him.
And I would like to say this too, Brian. We talked a little bit about the special teams value that he brings. Someone asked, I think in the chat at one point, is this a Brian Mason recruit? No, this is a safety recruit that Brian Mason is also going to sign off and say, like, yeah, I like him too. You know, like I want him potentially on my defense, but they're not recruiting this kid just to be a special team stalwart. Like they think that he can play football at safety at Notre Dame, and then also the special teams value is a big bonus to that, right? So I just want that to be very apparent.
Yes, very good point. Very good point. So, Ryan, let's move on to Ronan Hanafin. All right, let's talk a little bit about what I want to kind of start off with first is just a reminder of where things are in his recruitment.
Sure.
And then I want to dive into film because that was really the main point of us wanting to talk about Ronan Hanafin was just his talent and reminding people why we think he's so good as opposed to just talking about it, showing the film to show why we feel that way. But it's still, to me, a two-team race, and it's Notre Dame and Clemson. I still feel like Notre Dame is the team to beat. I still feel that way based on everything I've learned. I just feel like Clemson has made this a lot harder than I thought that they were going to make it. And that is the concern. And I think it's, you know, I feel like the longer it goes on, obviously the more concerned I get. I'm just going to be completely honest with you. I don't expect this to go into the fall. I think he'll have a decision before the summer is over.
Agree.
But I do anticipate, you know, Notre Dame is going to be in a battle to the end. Now, I do feel like part of the reason it's taking as long is because Ronan wants to make a decision that's done. Sure. You know, he's not one of those, you know, I'm making an emotional decision and then I regret it and I flip in 3 months. Like, if you know Ronan and his family at all, part of the reason this is taking so long is that they're very thorough.
Yes.
And he's it's a lot like where Dante Moore was. It's probably the wrong analogy to use since it didn't end in Notre Dame's favor. It's how Jaden Obsborne is, right? How about that? It's how Jaden was, and it's how Christian Gray was. You know, Christian Gray.
Jeremiah Love has some of it.
There you go. It's I want to make this decision once. Right. I'd rather take more time to make the right decision that I'm not going to look back on with regret than to, you know, make an emotional one during a visit or right after a visit, and then I regret it later.
Agree.
Sometimes I think some kids overthink things, to be honest with you, and I wonder if that's kind of happening a little bit with Ronan. That's just my read on the situation. It's just my opinion. But the reality is Notre Dame is still pushing hard. Tommy Reese is pushing hard. Marcus Freeman's pushing hard. They both want him in a big way. You know, I think the relationship with Chancey Stuckey is evolving, you know, because again, when Notre Dame first started recruiting him, they were recruiting him as a defensive player. I believe Clemson has been recruiting him as a receiver from jump. Notre Dame recruited him, I should say, as an athlete, but I believe it was the defensive staff that got on him first. Then it was like, we like him a receiver. He wants to play receiver. So I in some ways, Notre Dame's been playing a little bit of catch up from a relationship standpoint with Clemson, a little bit, and that would be the only thing that would make me feel a little bit uneasy about where Notre Dame stands at this point in time.
Sure. I mean, I think you kind of hit pretty much everything, Brian. I think that most people that we have spoken to believe that Notre Dame is still the leader. But Clemson has done a really good job, man. I mean, hat tip to them. They have done, because they're playing from behind, and I think that they have narrowed the gap. I still think Notre Dame ultimately is the favorite for Ronan Hanafin. And if it ends sometime soon, I still feel pretty good about Notre Dame's chances. But give Clemson credit. I mean, they've done a great job in this one. They have. They have been very consistent with their selling point, to your points, right? Their pitch has been consistent all the way through. And although I think that Ronan will ultimately pick Notre Dame, I think, could change. Clemson has made this a 2-horse race, in my opinion. Like this is where we're at right now. So
agree. So Ryan, let's dive in a little bit of film about Ronan Hanafin, and I want to find there's some sophomore film that I'm trying to find here where he's actually playing. He's playing It's from a winter 7-on-7 that they had last year. So I am trying to find that as well. But let's start with some of his junior film, which is a lot of it's a defensive player.
Yeah.
It's him playing defense. There are some stuff of him playing receiver, but a receiver, it's just him being athletic. And that's the first thing when you see right now, I'd say Ronan is a more instinctive defensive player just because he's played it so much longer. I think the offensive part is coming around. When I first watched him play, I was leaning towards liking him more as a defensive player. And I believe I've said that publicly.
Yes.
But as the more I watched him, when I got a chance to, part of it's because I just didn't really see him catch the ball a ton. Yeah. The more I saw him, I saw some camp film, just watching him catch the ball, had a chance to see some other aspects of it. Let's pull this up now and we will kind of go through this. But and then you look at his frame and his athleticism and his speed and all that. You start to say, you know what? The more and more I like this kid as an offensive player. And that's where his upside is for me.
I truly believe that he could be a top 150 player in the nation on both sides of the football, if I'm being completely honest. Even though I am now also leaning more towards wide receiver, because I've also gotten a little bit of insight into what you're talking about, I still believe that he could be a fantastic rover if he wanted to, a really good safety. Right. Like, I think that he could 100% be that guy, but this staff is pushing for him at wide receiver, and it's very easy to see why with the height, weight, speed combination that he has.
Yeah, he can explode. And again, when I say more natural on defense, a lot of it just has to do with the experience. He's played defense a lot more. And you can see in this film, you see a kid that really knows how to close and just flies downhill with ease. I've had this debate with a buddy of mine who does not think he's a 4.4 guy. And I actually understand why. Number one is some people just look at film of, like, we had somebody in here who's no longer in the chat anymore, but had said, basically like, how can you watch that film and not see a guy that can run? And I think a lot of times you have to be able to evaluate it, right? And sometimes the other competition can make it hard for some people to evaluate that. And so there's a lot of, he plays in Massachusetts. Massachusetts sucks, so he must not be fast. And well, no, you don't evaluate that. You evaluate the player. And I think this play right here is a perfect example. He's barely running. I mean, you just see the effort. He's just barely running. And he's a very natural athlete. He's got to learn to take it to another level, because I think one thing that hurts kids like him, especially, it's a position on offense that he's just not as comfortable with. They don't just take off the same way, right? And that's why you really see his speed on defense even more so than offense. Is just he's more comfortable there. So you see him let loose a lot more. On offense, he's still learning that. He's still learning to bring that to the table. And so you just don't see him explode the way he does. And he still just blows by these kids that he's going against who are just not very good football players.
That one was a perfect one, Brian, because like you're saying, maybe this player that he's playing against isn't the most physically gifted or athletic player, but this kid is way off, dude. Right. Like, not even close to the line of scrimmage, and he just blows past him in that much of off coverage. Like, that shows. I mean, look at him come off the edge there. Like, if you don't think that that's a really explosive athlete, then I don't know what to say to you.
Right.
I'm not really sure.
Right. So we have been told that he's been timed in the 4.4s. I buy that. High 4.4 guy. I buy that. And he's a very smooth athlete. And the thing that impressed me that he catches the ball very naturally.
Yep.
So that's another thing is, like, even though he's not a natural receiver from a route running standpoint, he catches the ball very naturally. I mean, look at just how easily, again, this is like a Division III caliber player, maybe. Right. But it just it explodes by him. Very fluid kid.
He sure is. And I'm really curious if he has a baseball background, because he tracks the football very well. He looks like an outfielder out there.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. It's a very good question. Very good question.
And he sure does. And this is why I really like him on defense as well, is he comes to balance and strikes with a lot of authority on defense.
Yeah. Yeah.
He also does it in the blocking game, as you can see.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. We were talking the other day about Arizona's recruiting. There's a kid that Arizona landed from his high school.
Really?
You remember Mike Martin? Yeah, Notre Dame was looking for him, looking at him a little bit. He ended up committing to. I think he committed to Michigan early on, but that's him right there, kind of working downhill, number 5,
Gotcha.
or scraping across. Excuse me, right there. You see him coming from backside. He's going to Arizona. Don Brown's the new D coordinator at Arizona, and I believe he committed to Michigan, but it was I could be wrong on that, but. He went to Arizona with Don Brown. So it was a nice pickup for Arizona. But yeah, they went out to Massachusetts and got a kid.
I mean, look at that. I mean, just easy. Look how much separation he caused when, again, it's off coverage. Off coverage, obviously, just for I know people understand it for the most part, but the further away from the line of scrimmage you are, right? Because you're afraid of that speed. That's why you're in off coverage.
Right. That's not number 5 right there is who we're talking about here.
It's a big boy.
Yeah, he is. He's going to end up being an edge guy. He camped at Notre Dame summer before last, 2 summers ago, I believe. I can't remember which one it was. What I like about this clip right here, Ryan, this is like he's not taking a very good angle. He goes too far behind, but I love the lateral quickness here that he shows. Like very fluid. Look at the agility. Look at the cross step. He's got really, really easy athletic traits.
To change direction like that and also avoid traffic is a pretty difficult thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, there's no doubt. No doubt.
Like right there, those are great hands right there. When you're tracking the football down the field like that, those late hands, that really shows confidence in your ability to catch the football right here. Just look at his hands are very late here, which is a good thing. You're not tipping things off. And look at how easy that ball just kind of melts into his hands, man. Like that is just effortless football right there.
Yeah, he snatches the ball out of the ground or out of the air in a hurry.
100%.
He arrives with pretty good force.
Yep. Comes to balance as a defensive player. There's no doubt. That's just not even fair.
He's long, too. If you look at it, he's got pretty long arms.
Sure does.
And this is where, like I said, I fought it for a long time, the comparisons to Alec Pierce, but you can see it in this clip. It's just a long, 200 plus. And he's a lot thicker than Alec Pierce was coming out of high school. He's more similar to where Alec Pierce is now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I think Ronan's around like 208 right now, 205. So we're in that ballpark. Alec at the combine was 211. So he's definitely a little further advanced.
Right. Yep. Yeah, he's a really good football player. And I think you guys can see what we're talking about. And as a receiver, again, it's just all athleticism. This kid's 13 yards off the ball.
Yep.
That's just, that's like, I don't want this guy to run by me. I don't want this guy to run by me. And part of it's because, look at the down and distance. It's like 2nd and 25.
Sure.
So they're just giving him some yards, which is not a smart idea because they just got 15 back easily.
And this is going to be one of those guys, Brian. I still like him so much on the defensive side of the football. Even if he ends up with Notre Dame and becomes like a multi-year 1,000-yard receiver, I would still always have him in the back of my mind. But what would he look like at Rover, man?
Yeah.
What would he look like?
Yeah. And if he decided to play defense, he'd be like, man, what would he be like as a receiver?
Exactly.
You're always going to have that conversation about him. There's no doubt.
That closing speed's silly.
Yeah.
Just silly.
Yep. He tries to tackle a dude. That's the thing is he tries to tackle some guy first. And then he's like, oh, he doesn't have the ball. Let me quickly go chase down that quarterback who's like, blow the whistle. Yeah. And you want to know part of that action. Want to know part of that. Somebody just said.
Is that from the Water Boy?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. No, it's from Necessary Roughness. When they put Poppy in the game. And when he benches Blake and he's like running around, he's like, blow the whistle. Exactly.
Yep.
Somebody just made a comment. I think this plays a perfect example. Michael Parks just commented that Greathouse and Ronan blocking for running backs would be awesome. And that is absolutely correct.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely correct.
These would be 2 of the more physical wide receivers in the 2023 class. Oh yeah, that was something. I don't think I've ever seen that clip before.
He spun that dude around. Good Lord.
Wow.
You don't see dudes doing 360s after hits very often. He's
not even running hard either. He's not even running hard. He just
No. Goodness gracious. So Ryan, there was some. I did finally find it. It was hard to find, but there is some 7-on-7 film from. So Massachusetts like kind of canceled their season, and then they kind of had some spring 7-on-7 stuff. So I do want to pull that up, and it is 7-on-7 film from I believe last spring. So, but it does give us a chance to. The thing I liked about this film was you got a chance to see him actually run routes. You get to see him sink his hips. How is he getting out of breaks? How is he doing those type of things? And you get a chance to see him do some of that stuff. So that's why I wanted to find this film. So I don't love 7-on-7 film because of the pads, but we just watched we watch what we can do with pads on. This is more about this film really put me over the top with like, yeah, this kid can play receiver. Cause like as a former receivers coach, I look and say, give me a kid with this athleticism and this already the feel he does have. I can do something with this kid. So I want to go over that. So we'll watch that next. But this is from this past, not this spring, but like this is over a year ago, basically. Again, I can work with the choppiness there, but what you do see is you see a guy that understands sinking his hips, right? Weight is forward. He's not necessarily using his hands. I want to see him drive his hips a little bit more, see him catch the ball in traffic, which obviously I like. And again, catching the ball in traffic in 7-on-7 doesn't do a whole lot for me. It's more about the focus and concentration. I'm not worried about him getting hit, finds a soft spot in the zone. The other thing you're going to notice about him is he is a hands catcher. He really does. You see strong hands. What we don't know about him is, what can he do after the catch? That's a legitimate concern that I have, just because not concern. That's not a concern. I think he'd be very good at it. We just don't get to see him do it a whole lot. They don't get him like look screens a ton. They're throwing him the deep balls. But athletically, I think it works out. This is another one where he just, again, these are the kind of plays when we make fun of summer stuff. It's like, yeah, he's not worried about getting laid out, right? I mean, yeah, he's going to make that catch. But when you watch the kid play with pads on, you're like, he's not going to care about that guy coming over to hit him. That's
no.
So. But what I care about is the speed, the tracking of the ball, and the effortlessness in which he does it. Here's the other thing: he doesn't use this move properly. But I like the fact that he shows it. That there's no reason to jab outside here, right? Like there isn't one. But I mean, it works because that kid's terrible. That's not working against a Division I player. But I like the fact that he can stick it and accelerate the way that he did. So even though, like, I wouldn't have him use this move right here, I don't care. What I like is that you get to see him make the move, and then you can say, how would that project if he was using it correctly? And he would. Now, the one thing I hate that he does, Ryan, I hate when receivers stick their hand up when they think they're open. Just freaking run your route. I'll get you. You know what I mean? Like me, I didn't know you were open until I saw you put your hand up. Like just go run your route.
he's got to let the coaches and the quarterback know that he's open, Brian.
Yes.
Right? He's got to let them know.
Right. Golden Tate used to do that, and it drove me nuts. And again, now this is a thing where like there's a lot that I want to work. And now earlier I'd showed a clip, Ryan, where he did a nice job driving it. Because what you have to teach receivers is your feet are not how you stop in this way. Hold on, that doesn't make any sense. No, it's your hips. Your hips are the brakes, right? Your feet are the wheels, but your hips are the brakes. And sometimes Ronan shows that, but this is an example of where he's leaning back. So once you lean back, it's all about your feet, right? And it's basically like trying to stop when your brakes aren't really working that well, and in a car, and that's something he'll have to work on. Being a little bit more efficient at the line, something to work on. Here you see a better job of him sinking his hips, keeping that weight forward. A little bit too much of a lift. That's a bit of a tell, but all that stuff I can work on. That's all fixable and fixable quickly. Here's another play, Ryan. Look at it. Hand catching. It gets close to his body, but that's with his hands. Does not body catch that.
Now, I have no concerns over him about ball skills and hands. Like it's very easy to see on film. Like you said, there's things from a route running hips perspective that definitely need to improve. But like when you have this type of athletic profile, that size, that physicality, and those hands, there's a lot to work with, obviously.
But like this plays an example, Ryan. Okay, this is not great technique. He's a little choppy at the top end. But what I see is athleticism. I see technical problems, but I see a kid that can flip his hips, open up and run. I see great body control. I see all those type of things. And that's what you look. I don't care if a kid can run routes in high school. I mean, that's why college coaches get paid six figures.
Sure.
if you can't teach a kid to run routes, you should probably find something else better to do with your time. Love how he works back to the ball here.
Mm-hmm.
Really nice job.
Just got to get that hand up again.
Mm-hmm.
I'm open.
Yep.
I'm open, guys.
Yep.
Acceleration's just nuts.
Yep. MW Jr. Sometimes the QB does not see all the receivers, so we throw our hands up to help out. Good comeback. Good comeback. But as a quarterback, I hate that. Also, when you're running with one hand up, you can't run as fast. I love this. He doesn't time. He jumps right here because he doesn't necessarily time it very well. But the fact that he can still make this catch with a poor, so he leaves the ground too early, right, Ryan? Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yep.
He leaves too early. He needs to just keep running under the ball, is what he needs to do. But he thinks he's got to jump, and he times it. But look at that length. Mm-hmm. He's actually kind of on the way down when he makes that catch. That's impressive.
What is his teammate doing on the sideline?
I have no idea.
What the heck? I thought he was in the play for a second.
He's not in the play. He's following the route. Yeah, I have no clue what he's doing. Yeah.
That's okay. All right, sorry. I got very distracted because I'm like, what is that? Yeah. At first I was like, wow, that route spacing is awful.
Yeah, did that guy get jammed off the line of scrimmage or something? Like what happened? Right. But the body control and the length, Ryan. When we talk about catch radius, that's what that is. That's a kid with a really impressive catch radius.
Yep. And
that's something that Ronan Hanafin brings to the table as well. So I mean, to me, if you're a receivers coach, he's got to be like, oh my gosh, please let me get that kid, right? He's like a polar opposite of Jaden Obsborne. I mean, of Jaden Greathouse. Where Jaden Greathouse just, that kid's a savvy player, but like what you see from Ronan is the length, the athleticism, the speed, the ball skills, the body control. He just doesn't know how to play the position the way that Rico Flores does yet, and the way that Jaden Greathouse does. But this is why we say you've got to think about the difference between a floor and a ceiling. When we're talking about floor, Jaden Greathouse is far more ready as a receiver to come in and play the day he arrives, right? That's why the floor for him is so high. With Ronan Hanafin, if he's going to play early, and I actually think he can. I think Braylon James and Ronan Hanafin can both play early. They're going to play early, however, because of their athleticism and their ability to catch the ball, not because they know how to, run a precise, post curl route, right? And so there's different ways to do it that I like. And so for me with Ronan, it just depends on how quickly can you get him into that, right? Into that level. But the athleticism is there. I mean, there's no question about it. He's a long strider. He's very smooth, very fluid. He almost like toys with people. And he's one of those guys that I feel like when he gets to the next level and he starts being surrounded with guys that are like him,
getting pushed.
Yes. You're going to see him take his game to a completely different level. And that's why I say he's a 5-star upside kid. I don't think a lot of people disagree with having him as a 4-star right now. I mean, everybody's kind of coming around to that. And I don't think anyone no one's at least raised a concern with me as far as ranking him as a top 100 caliber player. I think the question that some have had with me is, do you really see a 5-star? And my answer is, yeah, I do. There's not a trait he lacks. Long, athletic, fast, like you said, tracks the ball very well. That's different than catching the ball. Tracking the ball it's like an outfielder. Like if you take a bad angle to the ball, and you're not going to get to it, right? Same thing with the receiver. You got to track it well. Can you accelerate through the look back? If you're not good at tracking the ball, you're not going to run as fast because you're trying to figure out how to gauge the football. You see strong hands, you see confident hands, you see catch radius. I mean, there's nothing he lacks other than just experience as a route runner and experience playing the position. And that's why I gave him a 5-star upside, because I see a kid that when it's all said and done is going to be 6'3", 215, probably running the 4.4s, have a 35-plus inch vertical, have a 4.2 sub pro shuttle that knows how to play. And to me, it's 5-star. That's a 5-star player. And that's why he got a 5-star upside grade for me is all of those things. I just don't see anything he lacks other than he's got to right. And he's got to get pushed against better competition.
I agree.
That's the other thing.
Because that's one thing on film is it's so impressive to watch, because at times you're like, he's not even running hard.
Right.
Like he's just cruising, man. Like it's not, there's a lot that just is not, it's not hard for Ronan Hanafin right now. I think that there is something that is going to be unlocked in him, which is up to the upside part of it, right? Like when he is going against guys And I know Cam Hart's probably not going to be on the football team, most likely. We'll see what happens. But he's not going to be – when he's working against guys like Cam Hart who are as long as you and also as fast as you.
Ryan Barnes, Benjamin Morrison, right?
Right.
Yeah, right.
Guys that can push the best out of you. Again, we always go back to the iron sharpens iron conversation, right? Like, and that's what we're talking about now. When he's against guys that he can't just coast and be more athletic than.
Jaden Mickey will eat him up at the line of scrimmage the first time they go against each other.
And he'll let him know about it.
And he'll let you know about it and you beat him by 20 yards for a touchdown. I mean, that's the thing I love about Jaden Mickey. But the point is when you go against a guy that's as technically sound already as Jaden Mickey, who's going to continue to get coached, when you go against a guy like Benjamin Morrison, who's someone who I think for a corner has the length to give a guy like Ronan Hanafin problems. When you go against guys like, someone as fast as Micah Bell, you can't just kind of coast by, right? Yep. When you go against a guy like Christian Gray, who's really long and can flip his hips and run with you, those things are going to bring out that in you if you're a competitor. And anyone that knows Ronan Hanafin knows this kid is a competitor. And it's just, as I've said before, when you are blowing past people at 85%, you don't necessarily think you're 85% because you're blowing by people. When you then realize, okay, there's another level. That's what's so great about competition. And that's why Marcus Freeman has spent so much time emphasizing competition in practice. We're going to compete at everything because I want that mindset of I'm going out and I'm battling Jaden Mickey today, and I'm going to battle him for 2 hours, whatever the practice is. And I'm Benjamin Morrison and Micah Bell and Christian Gray. And, okay, I'm in the slot this time. I got to go against Peyton Bowen. I got to go against Don Schuler. I got to go against, whoever else. Xavier Watts, Ramon Henderson. When you're playing against that, it's like, okay, Jaden Mickey's busting me up. So what do I got to do? Okay, let's work. I got to do this. I got to use my hands. I got to use my feet. I got to do this angle. I got to rock it. I got to rock him to sleep. I got to use my size. I got to use all of it to mix it up. That's how you get better. And that's the thing to me that excites me about a kid like Ronan Hanafin, and same thing with Braylon James. Braylon James is a very similar player. Braylon has no really feel for the game right now. He's just all athleticism because he hasn't really been coached on how to play receiver the way that he needs to. Once that happens, boy, that's what you want to see. So you see in the film, that's why Notre Dame wants Ronan Hanafin. That's why we think he is a great fit at receiver, even though he could easily play defense. But that's why you see, to me, Ryan, where the upside is greater, because on defense, I often wonder, can he keep that athleticism at 230? That's a question I have. And I don't think he's a safety. I think maybe Rover, but even then, like, I think he could play it and play it at a high level. I'm more thinking like from an upside standpoint. Whereas at receiver, I see a kid that his size he doesn't have to add, he doesn't have to add any size to the next level to play receiver. No. If he stays 205 at the same size he is now, the next 4 years, he's big enough to play. What he'll add is more muscle, more strength. He doesn't need to add weight to that position. It's about become more explosive, become physically stronger, even if you only add 5 pounds. I think he'll get up to like 215, but he doesn't need to like get to 225 to play. No. Same with Jaden Greathouse. Jaden Greathouse doesn't need to add any weight. If anything, you want to make sure he doesn't add too much weight, right? He may only add 3 to 4 pounds. He may lose 3 or 4 pounds. It's going to be about continuing to get stronger and the physical refinement. If you're plus 200 pounds as a receiver and you're over 6 feet tall, you're plenty big enough to play the position. Sure. Unless your body just naturally gets you there. Like Chase Claypool at 225 is a very natural 225. If he gets below that, it's probably because he, wasn't working out that summer. You know what I mean? Other guys just have different body types. So that's what we see in Ronan Hanafin. We wanted to dive into the film because we hadn't really done that together, and just so people can kind of get a peek at why we're so high on him. So now you have an idea.
Brian, do you think I carry 225 well?
No comment. I know I don't. That's all I care about.
I don't either. I was trying to get a compliment out.
But if I was 6'3", if you were 6'3", if I could stretch you out about 6 inches, sure.
If I wasn't 5'11 and 3/4, I might have a shot.
Yeah, 5'11 and 3/4.
That's legitimate, man. That's legitimate. That is verified. That is 5'11.7 right there.
Okay. All right. That's good. All right, so that's going to do it for the recruiting mailbag. The recruiting hour and a half. for today. So we talked a lot about a lot of different topics. Obviously, some Notre Dame commits, some Notre Dame offers, some kids in Notre Dame is trying to close on. So a lot to discuss today, Ryan. And so we'll finish things up. Now that we wrap that up, we'll go to our mailbag. But before we do, obviously, don't go anywhere. But before we get to our mailbag, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast. If you're listening via podcast, please give us a 5-star review. We appreciate that. Sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com and enjoy what we're doing. We got a lot of stuff going on. We'll have some more intel coming up here very, very soon as well. So thank you for being with us on this portion of the Irish Breakdown podcast. Now it's time for our mailbag, Ryan. So we only have a few questions so far. So if you all want your questions answered, please throw them in there now. We'll get to those as much as we can. There's a couple questions here from Brandon K to start things off with, Brian, but we had to start with this. It wasn't a question. Well, it was, but it was not a real question, but I just had to bring it up because this is very well done. Brandon K says, really tough question for you. Is there a relationship between your ability to hit a golf ball and your ability to recruit talented athletes in your state? He's referring to a comment from Brian Kelly this weekend, which I just think is incredibly well done, Brandon. There's a lot of shade here that I appreciate and respect. Yes, and it is. It's the better you get at golf, odds are pretty good. The worse you're going to be at recruiting. So yes,
because you're going to spend less time recruiting.
Yes,
right.
I've already FaceTimed 3 kids today. Oh, you're finally doing your job. Okay, great. That's wonderful. ICURN with Irish Luck. Thank you for the super chat very, very much. He asked, with how the 2022 class ended, how the 2023 class is shaping up, and with the potential of the 2024 class, could you see Notre Dame being able to just dominate like Georgia did last year? Clemson did their last national championship, and Alabama on past national championship teams. You want to take a crack at that first, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the formula obviously is what Alabama has done, right? As far as the consistency on the recruiting trail. And I know we're talking about, because Brian, I think you were a fan of especially how the 2022 class finished, right? With Jalen Sneed getting in the class late and, getting Tyson Ford on, to be a part of the program and all that good stuff. 2023 having the potential to have a top 3 class. If they're able to do the same thing in 2024, you're in the right direction. But I think it still even takes a couple more years to be just a consistent dominant team, right? Like you need to stack classes for them to get to a point where it's just like, wow, someone is off the field or someone got injured. The next guy in, just as good as the last guy that was in, right? Like that's where you get rotations like the Georgia Bulldogs just had a defensive tackle where it's like we have Jordan Davis, but also we have Jalen Carter. Also we have Devontae Wyatt. Hey, we have Trevon Walker, but we also have Nolan Smith, who going into the year wasn't even their best edge. And everyone forgets about Adam Anderson was their dude going into the year, right? So I think it's going to take a little bit while from getting to that level. But Notre Dame, if they start stacking classes, it's going to get to that depth point pretty quickly here, in my opinion.
I would say I'd have to see how the 24 class ends. And the reason I say that, because this is a great question, because he's basically saying there's 3 classes in a row. The 22 class had some holes, but the places where it hit impressively, right? I mean, you only signed 1 receiver. That was a big loss, but the one we got was pretty good. You got Jadarian Price at running back. You got the 2 tight ends are really good. You got a good 5-man class in the offensive line. Defensively, very, very strong class. You didn't fill up at safety the way you needed to. But then they come out and they have a very strong safety class in 2023. Can they repeat that again in 2024? Are they able to fill up, like you said, more edge rushers? Can you sign Keon Keeley in this class and then follow up with Elijah Rudging in the next class? They're doing well with the power ends. Last year you got Tyson Ford, and this year you get a couple. Brendan Davis or Brendan Vernon could be that guy. Obviously, Boubacar Traore could be that guy. And you've already got Brandon Davis Swain in next year's class. So there's some positions they're doing well. But it's one thing for me to say if they get a really good edge rusher, that's one thing. But then I got to see, well, who is that edge rusher? And so for me, I just got to see how it shakes out. Say you get a really good receiver class. Okay, but is that really good, meaning you got guys that we really like, or does that mean you end up getting Micah Hudson's and Ryan Wingos, right? And so to me, I'd actually have to see it kind of play out. I will say this, however, if Notre Dame can finish 24 with the guys that you and I would view as like the difference makers of the level that they got this year. So, there is a Micah Hudson in there and a Ryan Wingo potentially. They are able to go out and get an Elijah Rushing or a Nigel Smith or, guys like that to go with what they have now. If they can follow up at linebacker with another great class, if they're able to get the Caleb Beasleys and guys like that at corner that we think are difference makers, if they're able to go get really good safeties in the class, Peyton Woodyard, and there's plenty of good safeties on the board, I think they do have a chance to be that kind of team. I think the difference is between Notre Dame and Georgia is I don't think Notre Dame would necessarily quite have the depth that Georgia did at a couple spots, but they'd be built differently. I think Notre Dame, you could argue, maybe would have a little bit more athleticism up front from a football standpoint, where Georgia's guys were more big power athletes because it's the style of defense they run. So there'd be some differences in style of play just because they run different defenses. But yeah, I do think when you look at last year's linebacker class and D-line class and corner class and what they're doing now, that they have a chance to get there. The difference is I think Notre Dame's recruiting better offensively right now. And part of it, too, is Georgia's offense last year struggled through a lot of injuries that tamped their offense down. They didn't have George Pickens most of the year. They didn't have Eric Gilbert, who I think Eric Gilbert's a little overrated. He's still really good. And you put him with Brock Bowers all year, if he's healthy physically and mentally, that offense is going to look a little different. Georgia's a much better football team, and you also then add George Pickens in at receiver. So that's the part of it too, but that's also where you got to get to, where you can lose an Eric Gilbert and a George Pickens and an Adam Anderson, and you still go out and dominate and win a national championship, right? 100%. Is Notre Dame there yet? I don't know if they're there yet, to Ryan's point, but I think these classes get them to the point where they could be in that conversation. But here's the big thing for me. They still have to be able to develop quarterback better. Yeah. They've got a guy in 2024 that I think can be a national championship caliber quarterback based on what we've seen through his sophomore film.
Sure.
And that's very limited. Austin Novosad and Kenny Minchie, to me, are guys that if you put them behind the right offense, you can go out there and play with anybody. But can they develop them? That's still going to go back to my question. And I think Tommy Rees has done some good things the last couple of years with quarterbacks who didn't have necessarily great talent, or Jack Cohn, or a great mind, Ian Book. Well, that shouldn't be an issue moving forward. You've got to recruit those guys. He's got to do a better job of closing as a recruiter year after year after year, not just one every 3 or 4 years. But if Tommy Rees can develop quarterbacks, then my answer to this changes, because last year's Georgia team was an anomaly. It was a down year in college football. Georgia last year does not beat 2018 Clemson. I don't think it's close, because they would have scored on 2018 Clemson. They couldn't score on 2021 Clemson. They're definitely not scoring on 2018 Clemson, and so to me, Ryan, that Georgia's not the team necessarily that I would hold up as the standard. Yeah. To me, it's more, can you get to the level of 2018 Clemson, 2019 LSU, 2020 Bama? Those are more of, can you get to that level? Because you're going to face those teams more often than you're going to face 2017 Georgia, or 2021 Georgia is the way I look at it. Just because of the offense just wasn't as dynamic. Defensively, you're not going to face a lot of defenses better than what they had. Would you agree with that, Ryan? I mean, that's a pretty darn good defense.
Yeah, no, I would agree 100%. I think for me, you're getting the early return for the new staff as far as what the recruiting is going to look like. Acquiring talent is not going to be an issue. And honestly, it hasn't really been an issue, for being completely honest. The next step, to your point, Brian, is, can this new staff develop that talent appropriately and utilize them correctly? Because if you now can not only acquire talent at this level, but then also develop at the same level, then that's where you start stacking these classes and you're a national title contender almost every year.
Right.
That's when you get to that point.
Right. Yeah, because there's no one class. Like Sean Davis and I had this conversation one time, and it was like, how the 2018 class really was a needle mover for Alabama. And as you look at it, it was 28, but if it was just 2008 and the 2009 class wasn't just as good, would it have had the same impact? And so, like, to your point, this class is great. It's shaping up great, and it complements last year's class very well. And I think it puts Notre Dame in a position to be a perennial playoff team and can pull off some upsets. But they're not to the point yet where they're at that level. And I think that's the thing for me. And that's where, it's a great question to ask, but the fact is we're having the conversation where it's, yeah, I could see that happening. I could see them finishing. And then he had another question, Ryan, if you want to pull up the second follow-up super chat that he had, which we appreciate from ICURN. He goes, I was more asking if they could be as dominant as those teams were in defense in particular. That's kind of where I was going with it initially, because I don't know if they're there yet. And part of me says, I got to see how the corners develop.
Sure.
Because as much as I like the corners, there's not as many definitive, oh yeah, that guy's going to be a star. He's going to be a stud. There's no, that's what I want to see.
Yeah. I mean, because to your point, everyone talks about, and I just talked about it myself, the fact that you have Jordan Davis, Devontae Wyatt, and Jalen Carter and all those dudes, but you also quietly, no one talks about this, Eric Stokes went in the first round and Tyson Campbell went the first pick in the second round.
Right.
You lost both those guys, and you have Kaylee Ringo. That's just out there, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just going from one 6'1" stupid athletic corner to another 6'1" stupid athletic corner. Like, it's just, that's the turnover. I mean, you get a Darian Kendrick to come in from Clemson, who had a good season last year. But the fact that you go from that, you have recruited guys like Eric Stokes and then Tyson Campbell, you lose both those guys who go top 33 in the 2021 NFL draft, and you follow it up by putting Kaylee Ringo on the field, right? Like, that's the difference for me right there, to your points.
And that's what we need to see. And I'll say this right now, safety is the position on defense I'm most concerned about. Now, I love the 2023 class. Peyton Bowen and Adon Schuler is about as good as you're going to get, in my opinion, at safety in this class. There won't be many better, if any better. But you didn't have that in 2022, and we don't know who they're like right now. I can't tell you definitively, yes, they're definitely going to get that guy at safety. Like, Peyton Woodyard is not I think a lot of people think he's a lock to Notre Dame. He is not. Now, is Notre Dame in the game with him? Absolutely, they're in the game with him. It's not just because his cousin went here, but he's a high academic kid, been on campus multiple times. Of course, having his cousin here helps.
Comes from a high reputable high school that respects the reputation that schools can bring. Absolutely.
Right. So, but there's a lot of work there. It is not a sure thing he's be in this class. And so that's my point, is until they're doing that everywhere, because if they just have an okay class in 24, that means you had a great 23 safety class and then a non-existent 2022 safety class and then just an okay 2024 safety class. That to me is still the biggest question, because what if one of the safeties gets hurt? What if, there's all types of things can happen. And so that's the position right now that I need to see, because to your point, what's a guy that we didn't mention? We didn't mention Lewis Seen, right? First round draft pick, just
first round,
another high level kid who was a very talented player. And then
they had guys like Chris Smith and Latavius Brinney who were just backups in their secondary, which are good football players, man. Like, they're just good players.
Well, the reality is, Ryan, if you just look at them as a team again, there aren't a lot of teams that could lose players the quality of Eric Gilbert, George Pickens, and Adam Anderson and go out and win a championship. Right. Did Anderson even make it to halfway through the year? It was like 4 or 5 games and he got booted.
It was something like that. Yeah, it was relatively. I think it may have been like 5 or 6 games. I think he had like 4 or 5 sacks when he got suspended, if I remember correctly, somewhere in that ballpark.
And I'm looking at George Pickens. He played 4 games. Arian Smith played 4 games. Like, those are your 2 best, most explosive receivers. Kears Jackson was banged up all year. His numbers, and Kears Jackson had 36 catches for 500 yards in 2020. And he had 16 last year because he wasn't healthy the whole year. He played and he stepped up and answered the bell every week, but he wasn't the same player. And they still have the depth to go out there and win a championship. And that's the point.
They even had, I don't know if you remember him, Brian, because I remember he had a really good game against Notre Dame when he was a freshman. They even have Dominic Blaylock on that team, who has just been he's been injured his entire career at this point, and it's not often that you lose a player like that. You're just like, okay, Kearis Jackson, go ahead. Okay, this receiver, go ahead.
Robert Beal Jr. is another one. That kid's been in college forever. Did I see somewhere, Ryan, that he's coming back this year?
Who's that?
Robert Beal Jr.?
Oh, yeah, Robert Beal's in. Yeah,
he's going to be a 6th-year player. He I don't know if you remember this, but he's committed to Notre Dame for a while.
Yes. Robert Beal quietly led that team in sacks last year, Georgia. Quietly.
Did he really?
Yes.
I didn't. Yeah, I knew he had 7.5. Yeah, you're right. 6.5 sacks last year. That's
he led
crazy.
them in sacks. Lewis Seen quietly led that team in tackles, even though everyone just want to talk about Nakobe Dean and that linebacker trio as well.
By
Yeah,
one.
was,
By one.
Yep.
There you go. But yeah, that's the thing is you have 3 linebackers. One of them doesn't start. They all get drafted. I mean, that's the depth we talk about that Notre Dame needs to build. It's not just landing a top player in this. It's not just landing last year's linebacker class. It's following it up with the 2023 linebacker class that could be just as good if they get Jaden Obsborne. That's what Bama does. That's what Georgia does. That's what Ohio State does. That's what Clemson did. Now, Clemson does it differently because they're really good at finding some of the under-radar recruits. But the point is, we're not talking about those teams finishing the top 3 in recruiting rankings. We're talking about those teams adding really good football players. That's the difference between Georgia and Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and Texas A&M, who signs like 8 defensive linemen, 1 linebacker. How many linebackers they signed the year before? 0. Because there's a difference between winning recruiting rankings and winning football games, and that's what Bama and Georgia and Clemson and Ohio State never have gotten enough credit for. They're just not piling up recruits randomly. They're building a team, which is something that Florida State has always struggled with. USC has struggled with. Texas A&M has struggled with recently, where they're getting highly ranked kids. Like A&M didn't just finish 15th and 19th the years before and then all of a sudden jump up to number 1. They were consistently a top 10 team. A&M has not played like a top 10 football team. They have far underachieved based on their recent recruiting rankings. We ain't 4 last year.
Yeah.
But then you saw games like the Bama game where, those are a bunch of really talented players, but they're not developed and they don't have the depth where if a guy struggles, they're not good enough in other places to overcome it. Things kind of all have to go their way. And that's how they could beat Bama one week and then go lose to, Mississippi State and LSU another week.
Probably, yeah.
And that's the difference. So
or beat Kent State 10-7,
right?
Whatever that game was.
Right?
Like,
was it Colorado?
Exactly.
Yeah, Colorado. It was Colorado, who's terrible. They beat 10-7.
I thought they played Kent State.
They did. They did.
Game.
It was 41-10. But if you go look at the box score, they ran it. They ran it away.
Huh.
But they lost to Arkansas, lost at home to Mississippi State, lost to Ole Miss, lost to LSU, but beat Alabama. Killed Missouri, blew out South Carolina and Auburn, but lose to those teams. And a lot of it's because you have depth. If you're dependent on a couple guys always playing great, you're going to lose games because those guys aren't always going to play great.
Sure.
And that's kind of where Notre Dame has been in the past, right? And that's going to be the difference here moving forward. Is can you stack those classes up right after another? I think that's going to be the key for Notre Dame moving forward.
I forgot Brenton Cox was on Georgia a few years ago too, and he transferred to Florida. So they've lost some dudes even to transfer. You're just like, wow, that's crazy how they're recruiting at like edge and different spots like that. Pretty nuts.
Got a super chat from John Harlow. Thank you, John, very much. Love the show and look forward to your podcast every day. Appreciate that, John. Michael Mayer and others have said how BK was never around in the summer and didn't hang with the guys. Was the Notre Dame administration wrong to let him do that? Why did they? I can't speak to that. This isn't new. This is something we've talked about before. When I put Kelly on blast after his comments about Notre Dame players, LSU, I wanted to be around players that want to win and all that nonsense that he said about Notre Dame. We reported at the time that Brian Kelly, look, it wasn't just Summers. Brian Kelly would, and I've been told this by former player after former player after former, I'm talking guys that are in the NFL now, that he would greet the team back in the winter and then they wouldn't really see him again until spring ball started, till about when spring ball is about to start. That's a couple months. They just wouldn't see him. And Summers, we talked about, he'd come back in town for like the one recruiting weekend, because then there was a time when summer visits first started becoming a big thing that Notre Dame would like try to fit them all into like one weekend so that Brian Kelly didn't have to be there for the whole month of July, could be gone. And, it's just stuff like that, Ryan, that was really frustrating and not new. And how can your team trust you and feel like you're going to go to battle with them when you're never around?
Right.
And, so why, but to his question, why the administration let him do that? Because he won.
Sure.
And he got the credit for the winning. This is a perfect example. So from January to August, a span of 7 months, Brian Kelly would be gone for 4 of them. So explain to me again how Brian Kelly gets the majority of the credit for the success of the football team.
Brian Kelly gets all the success for winning and none of it for losing.
That's Brian Kelly's MO, yes.
That's how it works.
And I know some people don't like us talking about Brian Kelly, but this was brought up and asked. So,
yeah,
and I like how he had to Mayer like multiple times in the interview was like, look, I like Coach Kelly. I have respect for Coach Kelly. Because it's like, what you're about to say is like going to make him look bad. And, kudos to Michael for being respectful, but also kudos to Michael for being honest. And it wasn't asked in an attempt to take a shot at Brian Kelly. It was more of what's the difference between the two? I believe was the premise of the question. What's the difference between the two? And he was like, Coach Freeman's at every workout. He's at everything he's legally allowed to do. And I've heard from several people, parents and players, like the players will come in to to treatments and stuff. And Freeman and some of the other coaches are in the flipping weight room working out.
Yeah.
As the players are walking into the Goog for their whatever they're doing, they're in there getting a workout on. And, when you see that from your coaches, it's like, okay, this guy's in it with me. He's not just telling me to get up in the morning and go lift. He's getting up in the morning and going and lifting. And that's why these kids are going to respond to him better. They're going to have more trust in him. And when he says, do this, there's going to be less why. There's nothing wrong with players asking why. But if a player's asking why a lot, it's usually because he doesn't trust you. Mm-hmm. Or he just, some guys isn't because they just don't understand. But and I'm not talking about why in the part of a install, because you always want guys asking questions during install, the initial install. But if they're always asking why should I do this? Why should I do that? Why should I do it? Because they don't trust you. You're just telling them to do it. They don't think that you're in it. Right. With Marcus Freeman and his staff, when they say these things, well, hey, they're doing it. So, we better do it. Right.
Right.
And there's a level of accountability. Like from January to March, it's like, that you were accountable to Matt Bayless and some of the assistants, but not all. Whereas now there's always top to down accountability because not only is Matt Bayless there. Now, the other thing too is this isn't Marcus Freeman taking over for Matt Bayless and not letting people doing their jobs, right? That's not what this is. It's just he's always a presence, these players, whether it's at workouts he's allowed to be at or workouts he can't be at, that when they come back, they see he's in the office working, he's in the gym getting his own workout on, all that kind of stuff. He always wants to be seen by the players because they know, hey, we're not out here slaving while coach is on vacation. That's what people would I can't tell how many times I had kids complain about this. They're out here all summer working out in the heat and the head coach is off in so-and-so with his family. Now, there's a time and a place for that, but Marcus Freeman does that when the kids are also doing that. You know what I mean? Like when they're on downtime.
Which is what it's designed for, right? Like that's supposed to be like an open period of time, a window for vacations, and doing all that type of stuff. Yeah.
Right. So, there's just going to be such a greater level of trust into that one. So that's where we're at.
Yes.
Brandon K also asks, I know special teams recruiting isn't as high profile, but how are we looking on kick and punting for 22, 23, and 24? Punting is kind of already locked up. They signed it's Bryce McFadden, correct? I always want to call him Devin McFadden. McPherson.
Yeah, Bryce McPherson.
Yeah. Yep. So he's the punter, and he's got a pretty strong kickoff leg as well.
He's a long kid, man. He's a pretty big kid, yeah.
Place kicker is more of a question mark. They got a commitment in the 23 class from a kicker for a walk-on. Now, what I don't know, and I'm going to have to do some research on this, what I don't know, Ryan, is if he's kind of like a Harrison Leonard type of walk-on, or if they were just able to land a kid that's a legitimate scholarship caliber kid, but is in a situation where he can be a walk. I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, I've never seen the kid kick, and I don't necessarily feel I'm a great evaluator of kicking. I've seen one has him ranked somewhat high-ish, in I don't remember if it's Coles or if it's Saylor. Those are the two kicking experts. I don't know which one he's in, but one of them ranks him in like the top 10 or so of place kickers. But but that's pretty high ranking for a walk-on, right? And so it leads me to believe, my opinion only here, that he understands they just don't have a scholarship for a kicker right now because Josh Bryan's still on scholarship, but he wants to be at Notre Dame and he's got a spot at Notre Dame. And so he's going to come in as a walk-on, but he's a pretty well-regarded kicker. If you're in the top 10-ish, 10 to 12 of the Saylor or Cole kicking rankings, you're a pretty good player. Now, some of those kids aren't ranked in both. I think a lot aren't in both because it's more about which one you go to.
Yeah.
I'm with Saylor, I'm with Cole, which is fair because they're just ranking the kids they've worked out with. It's not like a biased ranking. Like these are the rankings of the kids we work with. They're not like out evaluating film. It's a ranking of the kids that they've worked with.
Sure.
So it's a different type of ranking that people need to understand. And I have a great respect for both of them. They both do a great job.
Isn't there one that does a ranking that's on a 6-star scale, not a 5-star scale? It's so weird to me, man. It's so weird. I'm not the guy to ask about.
But they're not. Yeah, but they're not trying to be like rivals or whatever. This is just their goal is to help kids get to college. That's what they are trying to do. We're going to coach these kids. We're going to work with them, but it's also about giving exposure. I mean, Saylor and Cole both. I mean, well, Cole's son is J.J. Cole, who's a quarterback. He's going to Iowa State, really good quarterback.
Yep.
But the thing about both of them is they really view what they do as, yes, we work with kickers, but we're trying to create exposure for these kids to create more opportunities for these young men to go get college educations and get college scholarships and have a chance to continue their kicking careers. So I have a great deal of respect for what both of them do. I really do.
For sure.
But in regards to are their rankings accurate or not, I don't know enough about kickers to say, but they're held in regards by people that do know that stuff. And that's what I can tell you.
Yep.
So as far as kicker in 24, I don't think we'll see a punter. Kicker, I don't know the answer. It depends on how confident they are in the kid they're getting in 23. But I would imagine if you can get a quality walk-on kicker, you'll take one just about every year. I mean, you're getting a kid that can kick and he's willing to pay for his way, then why 100%. Not? Yeah. Why not?
Would you not? Exactly.
Right. All right, here's some more. Notre Dame 2164. If we get Hanafin and then get as good or better haul in 24, would you guys say that the wide receiver room is healed from all the damage from the last few years, or maybe it depends on who stays? Ryan, you want to take a shot at that one?
Yeah, I was going to say if you have a 4-man haul potentially this year, if they're able to land Ronan Hanafin, and then you go into 2024 and you have a 3 to 4 good haul, right? Not 3 to 4 names. Like if you get guys like Ryan Wingo and then a couple other guys that you really like, or a Micah Hudson and a couple other guys you really like, a quality class in back-to-back years on top of Tobias Merriweather, then yeah, I think that's where, I mean, obviously, Brian, it always has to pan out, right? Like you have to develop it properly.
Right.
But if you get those 7 players in back-to-back years and 8 in 3 years, talking also about Tobias Merriweather in 2022, then yeah, I think you've rebuilt it really well, in my opinion. Yeah, I think you're at that point, at that level.
I would say I'm probably still a guy away from for me, I want 9 to feel like it's completely healthy. I think 9's the minimum number that I'm comfortable with, simply because, like you said, Ryan, if you have 8 and you're a 3 receiver offense, it means you can't fill out a 3 deep. And that's the goal with most position groups, right? You want to be able to go at least 3 deep. I think the other aspect of it too is when you can't fill out a 3 deep and it's a young group. So, I mean, you're going to be talking about 1 junior, 4 sophomores, and 3 freshmen. There is the thing of, you better hope they all pan out. Otherwise, you don't have enough depth to necessarily do all the things you want to do, because depth is not just about it's not just about, Ryan, do you have enough guys to fill out on Saturday? Depth also matters, because are you throwing walk-ons down there against your first-team defense all week, or you got some young guys that are still developing, that are able to give them a test? I think that's the big thing. But for me to feel good about 8, Ryan, I need better than just Micah Hudson or Wingo and some good players. It needs to be the same. The 24 class, whatever the numbers are, minimum 3, needs to be the same quality top to bottom as the 23 class for me to say it's been healed. Sure. I'll feel a lot better about the numbers, but to me, 1 Merriweather, 4, and then 3 next year leaves you basically just with 1 more guy than you have right now, because you're at 7 right now. It only gives you 1 more guy. I say the quality is better.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Is how much does the quality outweigh the quantity? Question marks, though, right? Like that's
why I like the group. And it's just, it's like this. If I have 7 really good players and 10 really good players, and they're all of equal value, the odds of me getting more hits with 10 is greater than me getting more hits with 7. Because look, not everybody's going to pan out, whether it's injury, development, being away from. There's all types of reasons kids don't pan out. Some kids just going to get frustrated because he's not playing. He's going to transfer potentially. I mean, I'm just thinking of all the different things that could happen.
Right.
So I want to be at 9. That's why 9 is where I'm comfortable. I mean, honestly, if I'm putting an 85-man scholarship together, I'm probably going to have 10 receivers, because receivers can also play special teams. I mean, there's other things they can do, right?
Yep.
So 10 is where I'm comfortable with, depending on the makeup of that 10. Like, I don't want 10 guys that are like, I wouldn't love the fact that 8 of them are freshmen and sophomores, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do to get to the question of, have you healed it? I do think you need 4 next year, ideally. Or if you can get a transfer that maybe has a couple years of eligibility left, then I'd be more comfortable taking only 3 next year. So that's something I'd be open to. Or, hey, get a grad transfer because we really like where we're at as a staff for 2025. We think we get another really good trio next year as well. So we'll have a grad transfer to provide some depth and that kind of thing. I mean, there's different options now. But, I still would like to see a little bit more. But if it's the quality, though, Ryan, like you talked about, if it's like Wingo and Hudson, one of them, but you also add a Mylan Graham, you also add a Bredell Richardson, and Emmett Mosley, then I feel a lot better about that 8 panning out than the current group of 7 panning out, because there's 2 things. Number one, not all the players in the current roster are that high level of player. And 2, you got 2 of the veterans coming off major injuries. That also, I mean, if Avery Davis and Joe Wilkins weren't coming off injuries, I'm not as concerned about the receiver depth. It's not great, but you're like, as long as you don't lose some more guys. But you got 2 guys that are already injured and coming off of it and uncertain of just how they're going to be this year. Like, I think Avery Davis is going to have a really good year if he's healthy. I don't know that he's going to be fully healthy. I don't know.
It's fair.
And I'm very concerned about Joe Wilkins' ability to be healthy to provide depth. But if everybody else stays healthy, they'll still end up being okay.
You almost started talking about 2025 recruiting, man. You almost let it slip.
It was only hypothetical. It was only hypothetical. I'm so
Brian's so excited about 2025 recruiting already.
Corey Dickerson with a question. Does Notre Dame have any interest in Chris Parson, the quarterback decommit from Florida State? They do not. They do not. Sean Kane with a question. The staff has no fear. Actually, more of a comment. This is about Ben Minich. The staff has no fear. If there was other safeties they wanted, then they wouldn't go after them. Obviously, they like this kid. And look, I think they do like the kid.
Yeah.
There's no question. And we've been told that. But I also don't think, because I do trust this staff more, and because I personally like this staff more, doesn't and there's a difference between giving them the benefit of the doubt and then just assuming they're always right. Like, this staff is going to make evaluation mistakes. Do you know what other staffs make evaluation mistakes? Ohio State's, Georgia's, Clemson's, Alabama's. Everybody makes evaluation mistakes. So I'm not going to sit there and be like, well, they say he's great, so I think he's great. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, but we also have to still say, they do like the kid, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're right. In theory, I think we hope they're right. And I think there's enough that we saw on that film, Ryan, to say, yeah, I can see if he'd had a really good camp performance based on that film, then I'm going to be more comfortable with that. I just didn't see that camp performance, so I can't speak to that. I can only go off the film. But that film, if he was as good at camp as they said he is, I understand it. I do, which is why I'm going to be open to, okay, I get it. I don't know if I necessarily agree with it based on what I know, but I get it. And being open to what it is in the fall. But if the fall film looks a lot like the junior film, I'm like, maybe you should have made a run at King Mac or somebody like that, right?
Agree.
Some of those players.
Agree. I'm going to pull this one up real quick, Brian. Irish Chi-Town said, Ryan, which players are most excited about the 2025 class? I'm going to say this, Irish Chi-Town. The only person I'm going to mention here is Bryce J. Underwood, because it'll be the 3rd straight class that Michigan does not get the star quarterback from Michigan. So that's
I hope that's true
right now. Okay.
I hope he comes to Notre Dame because he's a stud already.
Yeah, is.
But as long as it's not Michigan, I'll feel even better about it.
Would that be great if they don't get back-to-back 5-star quarterbacks?
Oh my gosh,
in the state of Michigan? It'd be
wonderful. Be wonderful. We are happily independent. I love this name, by the way. First of all, he's got the Yoo-Hoo avatar, which I think is classic. And then we are happily independent. And then he has it, but it's independent with independence.
Is Yoo-Hoo still a thing?
I was actually at the store last night doing some grocery shop. Well, yesterday when the Jaden Greathouse stuff broke, I was at the grocery store. Yeah. And my wife wanted me, because she's just really tired and hasn't been feeling great. So I was trying to find these immunity drinks for her, and they didn't have any. But I went to the final section where I knew there were some drinks. It was like juices and stuff. And I saw 2 cases of Yoo-Hoos because they were in the cans. Wow. So I was like, wow, that's still a thing, huh? That's pretty cool.
I had no idea, man.
Yeah, I went through a Yoo-Hoo phase when I was coaching at Christopher Newport. It was kind of weird. I'll get these weird chocolate milk phases, and Yoo-Hoo's not chocolate milk. But
Wawa chocolate milk is the GOAT.
Yeah,
Best of all time.
I've been doing the True Moo. That's what they sell.
That's good too.
That's really good.
Really, that's good. Rich, man. That's rich. Yeah, that's a lot of chocolate.
Oh yeah. I put them in I get these like little Notre Dame cups. I got to put them in there. I can't have like a normal size cup. Like I can't put chocolate milk in this. It is. I get through halfway. This is really strong.
You need a little water on the side for that one. Yeah, that's a lot of chocolate.
Seriously. Got a question from Blaine Tiller. Blaine, thank you. And Tommy System, do you think Tyler Buckner's quarterback there would be more a zone player or RPO, and why? I think both.
Yes.
Both?
Yeah, I was going to say both. Like, I think you definitely want the run action off of almost everything, right? Because the thing about it is, even if it's a true inside zone, I still want Tyler to carry out the fake, because that still makes that overhang defender say like, hey, I need to freeze here for a second, right? Like I can't just tuck inside and get you that extra player in the box all of a sudden. So I think there's definitely going to be more zone reads out of the zone. I think there's going to be more power reads at times. I think they're going to pick and choose their spots with that. And there's definitely going to be RPO, and the RPO action, like, hey, if I'm not giving it, maybe I'm holding it, take it off and run. Maybe there's just a quick glance route or whatever it might be, or maybe I'm going to pull the whole read out, and then you just kind of dump the ball out off to like a Chris Tyree when he had that 50-something yard touchdown against, what was that, Toledo or whatever that was, right? Yep. So, I think that there's going to be a lot of that action, because you have to use Blade, even if you're not true. This is the way I look at it. Even if a play is a design zone where you're definitely handing the football off, you still have to use Tyler Buckner's athleticism. And that sounds weird because he's not carrying the football, but just the threat of him opens so many things up. So, yes, I think there's going to be more zone read. I think there's going to be a lot of true zone. And I think there's going to be a lot of RPO designations out of the scheme as well.
Very good stuff, Ryan. John Banco asks, give me a past receiver that Ronan Hanafin compares to. So past Notre Dame receiver.
A Notre Dame receiver. I don't know if I have a great one. I keep going back to Alec Pierce. We talked about that one out of Cincinnati this year. Those drafted in the second round. I think he's a really good football player. He's got the vertical elements. He's got a big catch radius. He's fast. I mean, there's been plenty of Notre Dame players that have big frames and are fast. I just don't know if there's anybody that like I point to and say like that guy reminds me a lot of Ronan Hanafin. Like I just don't know. Maybe Boykin. I have one. I don't know.
I have one. Not as tall. Okay. But athletically similar. I think that Ronan Hanafin to me is a taller, faster version of DeVaris Daniels. DeVaris was smooth. He was fluid. He caught the ball extremely well. I think just overall style of play. DeVaris is more of a vertical player as well. That was a good route runner. I'd say that's probably stylistically the player that he reminds me most of stylistically. The thing is, but Ronan is much bigger than DeVaris was. DeVaris was like 6'1", 6'1.5", like 185, 190. Ronan's 6'3", 205.
Right.
And so that to me is the big difference. I mean, I'm trying to look DeVaris up right now and see what his listed size is right now he's listed right now for his CFL team at 6'1", 203. So Ronan Hanafin's bigger right now than DeVaris is like a almost 30-year-old professional football player.
That's crazy.
But the style of play is what I think the comparison is, Ryan. So imagine if DeVaris Daniels was 2 inches taller and about, when it's all said and done, 10 pounds heavier and a little bit more head on straight, but just football wise, very similar. Because I thought DeVaris caught the ball very well. I mean, and I thought he tracked the ball well. I thought DeVaris – he's another guy. If he doesn't get himself in trouble at Notre Dame, he was on the verge of really breaking out. I mean, he would have been the guy that broke out in 2014, not Will Fuller. I mean, he was supposed to be their top guy. I mean, you look at what he did in 2013, he was really starting to merge. I mean, him and Tommy Rees went off a little bit in that Purdue game, if you remember correctly, in 2013. But, TJ had 1,000 yards that year, but DeVaris had 49 catches for 745 yards and 7 touchdowns.
Yeah.
And at times he had blew up Purdue. He had a big game against BYU. He was their best receiver when they played at Stanford in 2013 in a loss. He was a really good football player. He just couldn't. And a lot of it came late. He had some really impressive plays in the championship game against Alabama too. He had 6 catches for 115 yards. Now, again, some of those yards came in garbage time, right?
Sure.
but hit some really impressive plays in that game. So that's how I see Ronan. Like stylistically, I think is the best. If I had to fit a Notre Dame comp to fit John's question, I'd say his body is closer to Michael Floyd than it is to DeVaris.
Sure.
Style of play is not like Michael was a brute. I mean, he was just he was a brute. That's not
he was like
Ronan's
Jaden
game.
Greathouse. Jaden Greathouse is a physical,
Ronan is more smooth and explosive and fluid, and I think that fits DeVaris' skill set really well. And I think that's part. This is just my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta think that's part of the reason Tommy Rees likes him, because Tommy liked throwing to that type of guy. I mean, T.J. Jones and Tavares Daniels were definitely favorites of Tommy Rees as a quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Ronan fits a lot of those skill sets. So good questions. If I had to fit it, DeVaris would be my pick.
Brian, I'm going to pull this one back up because we went so much on the Yoo-hoo. Apparently, we forgot to answer the question.
Sorry. Start getting me talking about chocolate milk, and I just lose all focus of what we're supposed to be talking about. My bad. So you want to go ahead and answer the question?
Yeah. So the question was, Brian, Ryan, could we play Ronan both ways? It's just, look, I mean, one, from a practice implication perspective, it's just a lot trying to figure out how you're going to, practice at rover, and then you're going to flip over to wide receiver. And I really, for Ronan, with the athleticism he has, I really want him focusing on one position, right? Because I think that's where his game's going to get unlocked. I get the premise. I completely accept it. I understand why your mind goes there, because I think he could be an impact player at both spots, but I think you're going to limit the impact if you make him play multiple spots, because it's just going to be too much, man. Like, that's a lot. It's a lot to handle.
I would say if he were to come to Notre Dame, and let's say by his junior or senior year, could I see a thing where maybe they want to get him in a nickel package, where they're just going to let him run and just cover someone? Sure, maybe. But like Ryan said, my focus is on him developing the best player he can be. Look, there's a reason guys like Charles Woodson are so rare and freaky, and it takes an elite. I mean, let's be honest. Charles Woodson was a generational player. You just don't see that very often, and so I don't think I just don't think that is necessarily something I think about. I want him developing the thing that they're asking him to do, and then if comes a point in time where he wants to move to defense and there's a spot there, okay, then you coach him up there. Then maybe he could get a couple catches over there. But I think it's easier for a defensive player to kind of learn 3 routes and catch the ball and be athletic than it is for an offensive player to go play defense, because there's so much more. I have to know what everybody's doing around me involved in defense. Where a receiver can say, hey, man, you got a hitch route right here. You got a go route right here. And as long as he knows how to run the hitch route or the go route, he doesn't necessarily have to know what everybody else is doing. You always want receivers to know, or even if he only knows what the other receiver next to him is doing, that's enough, where you can get by in a giving him 15 snaps a game type of role. It's harder to take an offensive player to defense, and that's just 100%. Kind of how I feel about it. So
that's why you see guys like Charles Woodson that play a little bit of offense, right? Or Devin Hester that plays a little bit of offense.
Champ Bailey did that in college too.
Exactly. Mike Doss, that was with Ohio State. He also did that a little bit too, right? It's like you can see those guys that are mainly defensive players that are going to play a little bit of specialized snaps offensively. You don't usually see full offensive guys that also go play corner.
And look what happened when Utah had to put their running back out at corner against Ohio State in the bowl game.
The only guy I can remember doing it really well was, you remember when Troy Brown for the Patriots did it the one year where he had to start a corner, and he had like 3 interceptions.
That was so weird.
Well, man.
Didn't he still have like an 80 number? It was so weird.
He was number 80 playing corner. Really weird.
Yep. It just didn't. Yeah, it was weird. But he got the job done. There's been a couple college players, but usually when a guy goes from offense to defense, it's because they've been ravaged by injuries and they just have to throw somebody out there. And it's not an ideal situation. Irish for Life asks, hey, by the way, Irish for Life, I hope you're doing better, man. I know it's been a rough month for you, buddy, but hope you're feeling a lot better. He says, who are the most favorable options for offensive line in 2024? Favorable equal targets they want that they have the best chance to get. I know it's early, Ryan, but there's at least a couple guys on the board that you can talk about.
Yeah, I mean, so Notre Dame still has 4 guys on the board. I think that's going to expand at some point. But right now, Peter Jones, I would say, is the guy that has the clearest interest in Notre Dame. He's out of Malvern Prep in Pennsylvania, 6'6", 295. Really talented player. I think that he's a good mover. He's smooth. He has strength profile. I think he could fit either as a right tackle or inside a guard potentially. I think the guy that has the most upside of the four that have been offered is Gerby Lambert, who's out of Massachusetts. He plays at the same high school as Boubacar Traore right now, and he is 6'7", 280 pounds in athleticism, length, still figuring it out. Obviously, he's coming off his sophomore year, but like there is massive upside with the Gerby Lambert. They have also offered Josiah Thompson, out of South Carolina, who is a similar size to Gerby. He's 6'7", 285 pounds. Another kid that has a lot of tools, just there's a little bit of rawness to him, right? And he's a little bit more of a Eric Flowers style offensive tackle than a Gerby Lambert, who's a little more of an athletic type, right? So last guy is Kyle Altuner, who is out of Maryland's Good Counsel. He's a smaller guy. He's definitely the interior offensive lineman of the group, at least on the board right now. 6'3", 285 pounds. He is probably the most technically sound player on the board right now, though, because he plays extremely hard. He has good hands. He's physical, good stuff. He's just more of the interior player than the tackle types that they have on the board otherwise. So those are a few of the guys. Ian Moore is another guy that has not been offered yet, but is going to be at the barbecue. I put that out on the board earlier today. He's an in-state kid in the state of Indiana who is going to be at the barbecue. He's number 81 player in the class and number 89 player in the class on two different platforms. 6'6", 295. Another guy that's probably more of a right tackle guard type of player who's not been offered by Notre Dame yet, but you should keep your eyes on him as he, has obviously keeping in touch with the Notre Dame staff right now.
I think the reason he doesn't have an offer is because they got to make sure they want him in the class first, because when they offer it, his recruitment won't last very long.
Agree.
Yeah. Brian J. Irish, 45 days until Notre Dame and Ohio State. Man, it feels like just yesterday. We're like, it's 100 days. And now, man, it's getting quick. Brian, when does fall camp start? August 5th is the first day of fall camp. So that's when fall. So 45 days from now, right? Is that what he's saying? It'll be August 5th, the day after Jaden Obsborne commits. So 45 days to the first game, which is September 3rd, but fall camp is now 16 days away.
Hopefully Jaden gives us something to celebrate going into fall camp.
Yep. So 16 days away, 15 days from when Jaden Obsborne makes his commitment to either Notre Dame, Michigan, Texas A&M, Auburn, or LSU. I just had to say that. Okay, here's another question. We're happily independent, Brian and Ryan, with Ronan playing both offense and defense. Do we recruit him for one side of the ball, or do we let him pick a spot? And is there a chance we let him play both ways like USC did in 16? So we answered the latter part, but the first part, they kind of did that. Like they recruited him as an athlete early on, but I think they liked him on defense because big reason for it is because the guy that first fell in love with Ronan Hanafin was Marcus Freeman.
Sure.
And he's a defensive guy, just like I always lean towards, hey, let's put him on offense. But Ronan's comfortable playing both, but there was a time when the conversation was, where do you prefer? And he prefers offense. And so they kind of did do that, actually. So good question. And that's kind of how it played out. Irish Chi-Town, Brian, who will return kicks and punts in 2022? I think as of right now, it's going to be Chris Tyree's kick returner. And if I had to bet, I would actually probably put my money on Brandon Joseph as the punt returner.
I was going to say that too. Just seeing what I did in person, I think that Brandon Joseph's going to do a pretty good job as a punt returner too if he's chosen for that. And he's got really sure hands. I'm not worried about him being able to handle that duty, and it's a pretty silky kid. So I agree with you on that one.
Why? Thank you. I would say this: if Jadarian Price didn't get hurt, I could have seen a scenario in which he was also returning kicks.
Agree.
Meaning, like if Chris Tyree's your starting running back and you're looking for a way to get Jadarian more touches, that would be a way to do it. But obviously that's not going to happen now. But what's going to be interesting is if Chris Tyree is your lead back and he's getting 15 touches a game, do you leave him back there? And I think part of it's going to depend on how good your defense is. Because if your defense isn't giving up a lot of scores, then, it's only 2 or 3 extra maybe hits a game. And I think part of it might be is like if you're playing a team where they just kick it out of bounds all the time, maybe you put someone else back there for that. But if you're having a team that maybe isn't putting it out of bounds, then maybe that might be a game. So it's going to be interesting to see how Brian Mason handles the kick return game this year.
I think they should put Blake Fisher back there. I want to see it. Just one play, just one time. I'm sorry. Brian, I just saw a highlight. I meant to send it to you of Vita Vea playing running back in high school.
Oh my
and it was
goodness.
the most hilarious thing I've ever seen in my life.
Yikes. Wow. Okay.
He was hitting jump cuts and like running by defensive backs. It was silly.
That's interesting. Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker. Is Jaden Obsborne a Devin Bush comp or Ryan Shazier comp, or who do you think is the best comp? Ryan, I know you mentioned Devin Bush yesterday.
Yeah.
But of those two, just kind of how do you think the fit, how the comp is with those two guys? And is Devin Bush your top comp for him?
Yeah, out of those two especially, I like Devin Bush because I think their body types are a lot more similar. Shazier was a little bit longer than both those guys. I think the comp comes from the fact that Shazier was a silly athlete, man. Like a straight line speed, it was just crazy. I mean, that kid ran in like the 4.4s. He was a nuts athlete, just like Devin Bush was. So I think that from a body type perspective, I would definitely lean towards Devin Bush because Devin Bush is like 5'11", 6'8", 225, 230 pounds. And I think that eventually Jaden Obsborne can be similar to that. I think Jaden's a little bit taller than him, but also I think that he could hold 225 pounds pretty easily.
Yeah. We had a comment from Charlie Weiss's last belt loop. I can't wait for Micah Bell to be the kick returner and punt returner his freshman year.
I mean, it could happen. It could happen.
My only concern is he's thin.
Sure.
But yeah, he's pretty dynamic. But there's a couple kids in this class that I can see.
Class.
Like Peyton Bowen.
Yeah, I was going to say Peyton. Yeah.
Yep. He's a guy that I wouldn't mind seeing back there. I know he doesn't do it in high school, but a guy that I think would actually be a decent punt returner. And I usually don't say this about guys that long. Ronan Hanafin.
I was going to
say strong.
He
can make guys miss.
His first highlight on his highlight tape though is him taking a punt back.
Yeah, I think that's the only one he did.
Yes,
but he can make guys miss. He's strong. He's elusive. He could be a guy, and he's got great hands. Sure. Another guy that I could see being a punt returner if the focus is more on catching the ball is Jaden Greathouse.
Sure.
Because remember when Notre Dame in 2011 put Michael Floyd back as the punt returner? Because he's so strong. It's like you got to make that first guy miss.
And he does.
Yes. Yeah. And he's a strong guy. I mean, so there's a lot. And then, of course, obviously Micah Bell. Jaden Lamar could be a guy that could be a punt returner, in my opinion.
I don't think he'd be my first pick, but I could even see Braylon James returning kicks. Like he could return kicks. I
get nervous about the tall guy getting undercut. Sure. But to your point, I mean, he's got 2 kick returns for touchdowns in high school last year.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot of that. Christian Gray is a potential punt returner. He played a lot of receiver. Again, not so much kick returner, but punt returner. But Peyton Bowen's a guy that could do both. He's a really explosive athlete. And, I mean, look, if Peyton Bowen decided to, let's say Notre Dame got Ben Minich and all of a sudden Caleb Downs wanted to commit to Notre Dame, right? And Peyton Bowen was like, you know what? I want to play receiver. Like,
sure.
Oh, okay. You know what I mean? Like he could play both ways. I think his upside is better on defense. I'm not saying that. Like he's an elite player. And if he just wanted to do that now, I wouldn't be as in love with it. But if they had someone as good as him, Caleb Downs is, then I would be okay with it. But just the point is there's ways to get him the football. And I would want to find ways to get Peyton Bowen is a guy that I could see as a junior or senior in college as being a guy that you have sort of a Charles Woodson-ish role if the need is there. You know what I mean? Like, let's say there's a couple injuries at the position and you need someone that can be a playmaker. I could see that. Yeah. I could see that. He's that kind of athlete, in my opinion.
The 2023 class has a lot of kids that I just want to get the football in their hands.
Because
see them go.
And Ryan's got an article that's going to come out over the next couple of days talking about this, just the speed that class brings to the table. And that's the thing that's the biggest difference between this class and really any Notre Dame class. There's been years where they've landed really good receivers, but not ones that can kind of run like this group can run if they get Ronan Hanafin. There's been years they've landed really good secondary classes, but not ones that can run like this group can run. You're talking about Peyton Bowen's run a 4.38. Micah Bell ran a 4.40 and a 4.42, or excuse me, not Micah Bell. Christian Gray ran a 4.40 and a 4.42 at Ohio State's camp last summer, and he's the third. He's the third fastest DB. I mean, Drake. Did you see the post on the board today about somebody said the reason?
Oh yes,
about On Three claimed the reason they dropped Drake Bowen because they have questions about his athleticism and speed.
Him and Osbury, yeah.
What? There's a lot of things you could say about Jaden Osbury, size, whatever. Same with Drake Bowen. Athleticism and speed. Like, what are we doing here?
They wouldn't be at the top of my lists.
No, that's an absurd thing to say, but whatever. But this group can flat out. I mean, Keon Keeley is an explosive athlete for the defensive line. I mean, this class is just filled with dudes that can run.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like Jaden Lamar is one of the slowest guys in the class. He ran an electronic 4.53 this summer. That's moving electronically.
Yep.
You know, and it's like, okay, you know, like it's this group can run, man. There's a lot of athleticism.
If Notre Dame brings in Jeremiah Love as well, then
gosh,
that kid's got to be around a 4.4 high somewhere in that ballpark.
Oh yeah,
man. He can scoot.
Oh, yeah. His 40 time will most likely be very similar to CJ Procise and Josh Adams, who are both like 4.45 to 4.48 guys. Yep. Josh Adams ran a 4.48 despite the foot injury he had.
It's crazy.
You know, like he probably's mid to low 4.4s if he's healthy. Now, he had not a lot of elusiveness, but straight line speed-wise, boy. And that's why I compare Love better to Procise than Adams.
That's fair.
Is that I think Love probably is a little bit more explosive than CJ was, in my opinion. CJ was a 4.48 guy, I believe. I think he's in between Josh when Josh was healthy and Procise. The reason I think the style fits more Procise is because Procise was a really athletic. Procise was more athletic than he was a burner. I mean, 4.48's fast for a kid his size, but it's not like a burner. Josh Adams was a 4.48 while dealing with a foot injury. You know what I mean? Like he was explosive, but I think Jeremiah is more elusive, more fluid, more twitchy than Josh was. Josh was just fast. Agreed. You know, and CJ was athletic. And there's a difference between the two. I don't know how you feel about that comp, but that's why I like it.
No, I agree with it. I think that the first run that you see on Jeremiah Love's highlight tape is it's not the fact that he breaks into the open and you see the tremendous speed. He like literally someone takes a good angle on him and he just quick elusiveness too for a high cut kid, which is
that's what I loved about Micah Bell's first highlight. It wasn't just that it was that cut that he made. It was like, oh, okay, yeah, I like this.
It's different. Yeah, it's different.
I like this. IC05. Hey guys, we have been hearing a lot of good things about Tobias Merriweather and has a chance to start. How is Colsey handling this? Is he progressing? Now, this is probably my fault. I made a comment last week where I said it wouldn't shock me if by the end of the season Tobias is starting. I probably shouldn't have said that because I know how that's going to get taken. My point was that he's incredibly talented and he's having a good summer. And that put even more on it. That comment was more about just how good Tobias is and how good he's performed. And I didn't do what I should have done, which is, but this is all without pads on, right? Like, let's see how it is when the pads are on. So that was kind of on me. I'll own that one. But as far as Deion Colsey, we had another question from Tristram West, a question from a Georgia fan about Colsey. He's an Athens, Georgia kid. And I know it was best for him not to go to Georgia, but how is he developing and will he start this season? I think when I said what I said about Colsey, a lot of people who are down on, or when I said what I said about Merriweather, a lot of people that are down on Colsey took that as Deion's not doing well. And that wasn't at all where my comment was coming from. My comment was just more of a excitement about how well Deion Colsey looks this summer with no pads on, and Tobias Merriweather. And so it was an excitement over Tobias. It's not that Deion's not playing well, because the reality is if Tobias is too good not to play, there's also a conversation of Deion being that good, and then they're on the field together. I mean, Tobias, as we've said, can play field or boundary. Deion's more of a pure boundary guy. You know, he did play some last year, caught 4 passes last year late in the season, had a really nice post catch against Georgia Tech for 30 yards. Deion's a good football player. And for all the bashing he took in the spring game, which I don't understand, if Drew Pine's at all accurate, he has 2 touchdowns in the game. Remember the double movie he was wide open for what did Drew didn't throw it, or I forget what happened. Yeah, Drew threw a hitch, I think, and then Deion was wide open.
The miscommunication. Yeah.
And then there was the in cut near the goal line where Drew threw it into the ground. Deion's open, he catches it, he's right there at the goal line. It's a touchdown. He's like at the 1 yard line, I think is what it was.
My wife was freaking out on that miscommunication. She's like, the corner's squatting on that. Why would you throw it outside? I'm like,
did you I love this woman so much.
I proposed again.
I know we're already married, but can we have another ceremony like right here in the stadium?
Why would he throw it deep?
Yeah.
The corner was squatting.
Yeah.
I don't know.
have I ever told you that story the day that I knew I was going to marry Angela when we were in Notre Dame Stadium?
I think you did.
Yeah,
But
we were
yeah,
still
I think you
dating at the
did.
time, and it was the Duke game in 07, and it was miserable season, miserable game. It was wet. Jimmy Clausen throws a touchdown pass late, and I look over her, and I'm like, hey, she's probably miserable. She didn't love football. I didn't think anyway. And I looked at her. I was like, hey, they're going to win. You ready to go? And she looks at me like, what are you, nuts? There's still 5 minutes left in the game. And I was like, I'm going to marry this guy. It was great. It was great. I did.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, yeah, that's a great story. Jason Rose, which Notre Dame, this is a great question, Ryan. Which Notre Dame team from 2018 to 2021 has been the most complete? I think the answer to that is pretty easy.
Think so?
But I want to rank them. Oh, it's 18. Yeah, 8 because 18 had the same problem that every other team had, quarterback. They had a good offensive line. You had Boykin and Claypool outside. Fink inside had a really good 17 season. You had Alizé had a decent season. Running back, you were really good, especially once Dex came back. He had almost 1,000-yard year despite missing 4 games. He had a great defense that year. So I would definitely go with 18 being the most complete.
Okay.
And I think that was Ian Book's best season too, in my opinion. Ian was really good for most of 2018. He just didn't play well in the playoff game, but he didn't ever play well in those moments. But Ian completed about 70% of his passes going into the playoff game, and was averaging over 300 passing yards per game going into the playoff game. So 18 is by far is the most, not only the best team, but the most complete team. Now, the bigger question for me, Ryan, first of all, you can answer it differently if you think someone else was. But what would be interesting is ranking them 1 to 4 as far as being most complete. That would be a very interesting conversation for me.
I'm trying to reach back into the memory bank on 2019 and 2020 for a
19
second.
was the year they went 11-2, lost to Georgia and Michigan.
Yep.
And then
2020 was Liam Eichenberg's senior year, right?
That was the COVID year where they played in the ACC, beat Clemson, lost in the title game, and then of course last year's team to me was the bottom of the list.
Oh yeah. I was gonna say that they were number 4, and if we've established that 2018 was number 1, I was just trying to think in my head what 2019 and 2020 the difference there.
Here's the thing: I think the 2020 team had much better leadership. Which is why you didn't see the ups and downs of the 2019 team. But the 2019 team, when they were on, was a much better team. The 2020 team, in my opinion, does not go into Athens and take Georgia down to the wire. I don't think that they would have. Okay. But they benefited from a really soft schedule, if we're being honest. I mean, after Clemson, and you played them without Trevor, Tyler Davis, James Skalski, and Mike Jones, we've had this conversation. After them, your next toughest game was like 8-4 North Carolina. After that, it was a pair of 6-6 teams in BC and Pitt, 6-5 teams in BC and Pitt. It was not a very soft schedule. 19 wasn't a very brutal schedule either, but you had some decent teams in there. Virginia was a good team that year with Bryce Perkins. Obviously, Georgia went 12-2 that year, and you should have beat them. You outplayed them for 55 minutes of that game. The Michigan game, I think, taints how good that team was at times that year. I think Ian Book was another problem that year. He had some really great games in 19, but he had some brutal games in 19 too.
Sure.
And we've talked about this. He threw 35 touchdowns, but like 23 of them came in like 5 games. But comparing it to 20, that's what makes it tough, because I would argue that the 20 team was more complete, Ryan. It just wasn't as talented.
It's fair.
Because the 19 team had Aguara, Kareem, Dalen Hayes, and Ogundeji. You had Chase Claypool still on that team. Where in 20, you're trying to beat Alabama with Ben Skoranek and Javon McKinley, right? And in 19, because in 20, Kevin Austin got hurt, Brady Lindsey got hurt. I mean, you were really banged up. You were, running back. You had Kyron Williams, but then after that, you had Chris Tyree. You had nobody really after that, because of all the injuries. So it's like 2019 was similar to that. But once Tony Jones came back, he was pretty good. He averaged almost a full yard per carry more in 2019 than Kyron Williams did in 2020 or 2021.
Yeah.
So I think that 19 team I would probably go with next, because I think the talent was so, better. I'd probably go with them next as far as the best team. But if we're going to answer the question, Ryan, I think you'd have to lean towards 2020 as far as being a complete team.
And I'm gonna lead towards 2020 automatically, because I'm still trying to get 2019 Michigan out of my mind.
So that game sours it, man. It sours it.
It really does.
And not that they lost, but they lost in such disgusting fashion. Just
that with the Miami game a couple years ago. Like those are the games where I'm just like, I need to wipe them out of the memory bank. Like I do not want to see those ever again in my life. You know,
absolutely.
Like, I don't want to see Trajan Bandy pick 6 against Miami, and I don't want to see who was the running back that ran over Notre Dame that game. It was the Haskins, right? Wasn't it Hassan Haskins?
I think so.
Had a really good game against them. I'm just like, oh my god, they couldn't tackle that kid that day.
And they were out playing him early, and then you have the blocked punt, that the mistake that they had. It's just like, what are you doing?
It was
so bad.
It was a bad game, man.
So bad.
Bad
So
game.
bad. It really was. Let's see here. We have a question from Connor O'Doherty. Where would you guys rank this receiving class nationally when all is said is done, assuming teams fell out like guys think, if Notre Dame landed Ronan Hanafin?
Oh, so we're talking about 2023 recruiting.
2023 class. Yeah.
I thought we were talking about the 2022 season, the team.
That's a much different conversation. So how would you say this class is going to rank? I have a strong opinion on this. I want to give you a chance to kind of speak to that first. If everybody fills out like we think, and Notre Dame gets Ronan Hanafin, where do they rank?
I mean, the only team that I think is like head and shoulders above is Ohio State, right? Like, I mean, that recruiting class is just silly with Ennis and Carnell Tate and the Rogers kid.
Well, both Rogers kids.
Both
exactly. Because nobody talks about Bryson Rogers, and I'm like, that kid can play.
Yeah,
he's a good football player.
Yep, there's no doubt. So that's the only class where I'm like slam dunk, like Notre Dame's just not going to get there, right? Like we're just not going to. But I mean, top 3 to 4 class, like is that unrealistic? I think it's possible. I think it really is with that 4-man haul if they get Ronan Hanafin.
Yeah, there's a couple teams that might have a chance to jump if LSU gets Shelton Sampson
on top of Jalen Brown.
Then I want to see who their third guy is. You know, they'd be in the conversation. I think see who Alabama finishes with. You know, if they're able to land some guys, there's not going to be a lot of teams, in my opinion, that are going to have a chance to have based on our rankings, they're going to have a better chance. I would say Ohio State for sure right now on the floor has the better class. The floor. I think we could get into a bigger debate, and for just going to talk ceiling. But even then, I'd still probably give the edge to Ohio State, even then. But it would be a much closer conversation. But just because I think their fourth guy probably has a higher ceiling than Notre Dame's fourth guy is what I would say.
It's fair.
But LSU's won. Miami could have had a chance if they would have been able to get Jalen Brown. If they can flip Jalen Brown to go to Nathaniel Joseph, that is a dynamic 1-2 punch at receiver. USC has a pretty good 1-2 punch. I'm not quite as high on Mekhi Lemon as some other people are, but Branch is dynamic.
Branch is good, man.
Yeah, he's really good. Mekhi Lemon is a good player, but they're going to need another really good player to be in the conversation.
I saw someone say Texas. Who else do they have besides Jonte Cook? Do they have somebody else?
It's a good question. Let me look at their group. Jonte Cook's a good football player
for sure.
He needs work, but the talent is really impressive. Let's see what else they have at receiver. And there's a couple guys that are on. They got Jonah Wilson. Ryan Nesbitt's a pretty decent player. Jonah Wilson, I'm not familiar with. He's ranked as a 4-star by Rivals, 6'4", 205-pound kid. Ryan Niblett, is a decent player. He's a decent player. Jonte Cook's really good. They'd have to get another like top 50 to 75 guy for me to say they're Notre Dame's level.
Gotcha.
That's just my opinion. I like Jonte Cook. Maybe he ranks higher than the guys Notre Dame has, but his ceiling's not any higher than Braylon James or Ronan Hanafin and those kind of guys.
Someone said Jalen Hale. He's not committed though yet, right?
No,
he's just top target. Yeah.
And I didn't like Jalen Hale's junior film as much as I liked his sophomore film, to be honest. So I don't know if he had an injury or something like that, but I don't know if that would be enough to put them over the top based on what I know of them. But again, I say that very loosely because, as I just said, I don't remember watching Jonah Wilson play. So, just looking at his ranking, he looks like a top 250-ish kind of guy. But I haven't seen him play. So again, I say that loosely. I'm looking at it from the standpoint of knowing what Notre Dame would have, and then looking at what teams tend to sign. I can't think in many years they'd finish lower than third or fourth based on what we think of those players. It'd be a heck of a group.
I just watched The Future 50, Brian. That
Mhm.
Branch kid from
He's
Bishop Gorman
explosive.
that's going to USC. That kid is special,
Well,
man.
you know,
He's
I mean, it's fine. He looks great with that, but I'll tell you something honestly, Ryan. I saw the highlights
yeah.
of him, and I'm like, okay, whatever. Because
Uh-huh.
here's why: he's
Yep.
better with pads on.
That's crazy, man.
Like he's a really yeah, whatever. He did all that with no pads on, but man, wait to see that kid with pads on. He's a really good football player.
yeah.
Really good football player.
His body control and just he was a really good player. Really good.
Yep, very good. Let's get to some more here. We have a super chat from Christopher Morgan. It says, happy Wednesday, IB Nation. As a kid, I was a Nestle strawberry milk fan. And do you guys remember High C Green Ecto Cooler from Ghostbusters in the can? I do not remember the last thing.
I remember it.
I don't remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Nestle strawberry milk fan. Okay. Here's my thing with strawberry stuff.
It stinks. Oh, sorry.
I have to. I normally don't like it, like strawberry milkshakes. I normally don't like it, but every now and then I'll get in this weird mood where it's like Big Macs. I don't really love Big Macs, but every now and then I'll just get in a mood where I'm craving a Big Mac. Every now and then I get in a mood where I'm like, I want a strawberry shake, and then I'll have one, and then I'm over it. But if I try to have one when I'm not like craving it, which happens like maybe once every 5 years, it's weird. I don't know what it is, but I kind of feel like I have Men in Black 3, right? That where like some kind of time warp has happened, and all of a sudden I'm craving like chocolate, strawberry milk. Maybe it's something like that, but
time warp.
Yeah, normally I can't. I'm just not. I'm not into the strawberry stuff.
Yeah, I don't really like strawberry milk or strawberry shakes. I like strawberry lemonade if that counts. But yeah,
I'm not sure. I'm not a lemonade guy. It's too it's too bitter for me. Yeah, I can only ever drink it when I was a kid, and I was exhausted. Like, we were out playing, and I was hot, and even then, it was just like more just because I liked the cold. Not a big
Interesting.
Big fan.
I had a half yesterday. I had a little Arnold Palmer action. It's always good.
There you go. Here's a question I have for you, Ryan. You may know the answer to this. I don't know the answer. It's from Will Burkhart. Do you guys think the Bowens were named after the Mannings?
What does that mean? I don't.
Well, Eli and Peyton Bowen, were they named after Eli and Peyton Manning?
Oh, I never even had the parallel there.
I never thought about that.
Well, that's a great question. I have no idea.
Yeah,
your idea. That's
interesting.
I never even painted that picture together.
I mean, that's personal opinion. I have no knowledge of this. I would imagine so. I mean, that's an interesting brother combination.
It's very. I mean, because Peyton's becoming a little more of a common name, I guess.
Sure.
But like Eli's not like super common, right? Like that's not. I've never met an Eli personally.
And they're in the age group at say basically 17, 16, or 18, 17, where it would fit that the Mannings were NFL players. I mean, because these kids would have been born like in 2000, and if you're 18 now, you'd have been born in 2004.
Yeah.
Right. Well, by that point in time, Peyton was pretty good already. You know what I mean? And Eli obviously was going into year 2 or 3 around then. Wasn't he? When was he? Was an 03 or 04 draft? He was the number 1 pick.
Who's that?
Eli Manning.
Eli was Manning. 2004. He was
2004. Okay.
And so Peyton Manning was 98, I think.
Yeah, he was 98. Yep, for sure. Yep. So he was the number 1 pick in 2004. So
that's a great draft.
It's interesting. Yeah,
how rare is that you have all those quarterbacks that all hit? Rivers and Roethlisberger and Eli Manning, and they all hit. It was just crazy.
I mean, wouldn't you say you'd have to go back to the 83 draft, right?
I mean, I guess, but even in the 83 draft, I mean, you had Elway and Marino, obviously, but I mean, there were a couple guys in between that you're like, they weren't.
Well, I mean, but JP Lossman was a first round pick that year.
Oh, true. I forgot about JP.
Yeah. So, I mean, because you had Marino, you also had Jim Kelly, who was a Hall of Famer. You you had 3 Hall of Famers in that draft. The thing is, I think there was just more quarterbacks taken that year.
There was
like Todd Blackledge, like 6 or 7. Yeah,
Blackledge was not great.
Yeah, let me look at that one. He was a pretty good college player. Let me see, 1983 NFL draft.
Penn State, great. Todd Blackledge.
Yeah. Elway was first. Todd Blackledge was the second quarterback taken. Yep. Jim Kelly. Tony Eason wasn't very good, but he did start in a Super Bowl.
He was okay.
Ken O'Brien was a really underrated quarterback, in my opinion.
He fumbled a lot, though. He had a lot,
but he was a very underrated quarterback.
He was a good player.
And then Dan Marino. So was that 6, 2, 3, 4, 5. So he had 6.
That's crazy.
6. So
that's a crazy number.
A lot of quarterbacks, man. It's a lot of quarterbacks. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then you didn't have another quarterback taken. Here's the crazy thing is you didn't have another quarterback taken until the 5th round, and it was Jeff Christensen. Now, I think he is the guy that's he's a quarterback's coach now, I believe.
Believe so.
Yeah, and then the 6th round, you had here's some great ones: Reggie Collier, and then Babe Laufenberg. Like that, what a great name that is. That's hilarious. It sounds like it. And then the 8th round, the Denver Broncos. A lot of people don't remember this. The Denver Broncos actually drafted 2 quarterbacks that year. Okay. In the 8th round, the first pick of the 8th round, they drafted Gary Kubiak.
Oh, I have heard that before. I've heard that before. Yeah.
So, yep. And then of course that was back when they had like a million draft. Like was it 12 rounds? Yeah. So there's a lot of quarterbacks taken. But
that's like when Troy Aikman was picked by the Cowboys. They also drafted the quarterback from Miami in the 4th round. What was his name? Yep. Steve something. I forget his name. Yeah. And
one of the biggest draft misses ever, and I would be very curious to hear the story behind how he fell this far. The second to last pick of the draft, with pick number 334, the Miami Dolphins drafted Anthony Carter. Now, I wonder if that was one of those deals where, like, he was a CFL guy USFL guy. Because remember, that was back when the USFL was taking guys. Because remember, Jim Kelly got drafted in 83, but he went to the USFL first. And so I'd be curious if Anthony Carter had committed to the USFL, and that's why he drafted, because he was a great college player. And I don't think he played for the Dolphins. So that would be a very interesting story to see kind of how that played out. And I don't know the story on that one. I only know of Anthony Carter. He was great at Michigan, but then with the Vikings. So I'd be very curious how that backstory went. And I'm sure there's some folks in here that remember that would be able to share us. But so when I saw his name at the bottom of that draft, I was like, hold on a second. There's got to be, because that's the thing is, like, back then, it's like when Rocket got drafted by the Raiders, like late in the NFL draft. Well, the reason he didn't get drafted higher is because he had already signed with the CFL, with the Argonauts, but he still got drafted in the NFL. He got drafted in the 4th round by the Raiders. So very, very interesting. Very interesting.
I'm trying to find what happened there, but I can't find anything yet on Anthony Carter.
Yep,
we'll see.
No doubt. Yeah, somebody said, is there a Cooper Bowen? If we find out that the Bowens have a younger brother named Cooper, then we'll know that we'll definitely know. We'll definitely know. So we'll wrap up with this last question. I think that we're going to wrap up here. I think that these are all the questions that we have, and we got to get rolling.
Someone said Steve Walsh. That was the Steve that I was thinking of. They got drafted by the Cowboys after Troy Aikman. Steve Walsh.
Okay. Much better college player than an NFL player.
Well, yes, but here's a stat for you. Troy Aikman went winless his rookie year. The only win that Cowboys team had that year, Steve Walsh was the quarterback for. So
interesting. I did not know that. Yes. I did not know that. I remember how bad they were that year.
Yeah, they were like 1 in whatever.
1 in 15. And here's the thing: I believe, what was that? 1990? Was that when it was? The year that they went 1 in 15. Yeah, I think it was. Let me just look this up real quick, because my parents still are upset about this. It was 89. It's 1989. Their only win that year was, I believe, over the Redskins. And so, I'm looking this up. Yeah, it was at the Redskins. And so Washington was decent that year. They went 10-6, and that really upset because because if they would have won, they would have been 11-5, and who knows how things kind of pan out. But yeah, they were not happy about that. Like, how do you lose at home to 1 in 15 Cowboys? Because my parents are Redskins. We're Redskins fans now. They don't follow NFL anymore, but because my dad says the team I rooted for doesn't exist anymore. I love that. But yeah,
here's one, Brian. Similar story to that. The Miami Dolphins 2007. They went 1 in 15. Their lone victory was an overtime game against the Baltimore Ravens that year. And the Baltimore Ravens, I believe, were very good that year, if I remember.
What year was that?
2007. Oh, no, Baltimore was not good that year. Forget it. I lied.
Okay.
They weren't a good team that year. My bad.
Okay. I was going to say,
man, they were, because they're a consistently good franchise, but they were not good that year.
But still 1 in 15. Boy, that
Greg Cam. I remember watching that game because my dad's a Dolphins fan, and that was an awful year for him. Greg Camarillo had the game-winning touchdown in overtime over the Baltimore Ravens. It was ugly.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Here's the last question I wanted to get to. I thought this was really interesting. Jason Rose says, out of Clark Lee and Mike Elko, which former Notre Dame defensive coordinator is going to have more success?
I have an easy one for this one. I don't know if it's easy for you, but I think it's Mike Elko.
Okay, then it's easy for me too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Say why.
It's mostly because Vanderbilt, they're in the SEC, right? Like it's just going to be a tough road for Vanderbilt. I think it's going to be tough to not only recruit in the states, right, that you're in. Tennessee is going to steal a lot of the kids that they want, or other programs are going to steal a lot of the kids out of your backyard. But then also I think it's just going to be tough getting players that want to come play at Vanderbilt, to be honest, against other SEC opponents. While Duke, I think that we've seen more consistency of Duke being a good program in the pretty recent. I know they haven't been great over the last couple of years, but they did some good stuff at spurts under David Cutcliffe. So I think that Duke's just in a more, I think it's a more advantageous conference. I think they're in a more advantageous situation as far as proximity in the country. So I just think that they're going to have more success than Vanderbilt overall.
I also think it's a place where it's easier to win in other ways. I think there's more talent to acquire that's willing to go to Duke in North Carolina and Virginia than you would have at Vanderbilt. I don't know a lot about Vanderbilt's campus, but Duke's got a pretty cool campus. There's a lot of tradition at Duke that's not football related that you can sell, kind of like how the Notre Dame basketball team used to always use football games for their recruiting tools. You know what I mean? Like you bring a kid in that you're trying to close in on February and you bring him in for a Duke basketball game. That's a pretty hot experience, right? It's also an outstanding academic institution. So I think there's some built-in advantages, but when it comes down to it for me, Ryan, it's also the coach. I think Mike Elko is better positioned to be a successful coach than Clark Lee, because I think he's a better recruiter, to be honest with you, than Clark Lee. I think he's a guy that understands. Like Mike Elko has shown me one thing I liked about Elko is when he's been at places, like I kind of feel like when I watched Vanderbilt last year. Even then, you kind of saw Clark Lee kind of coaching like, we're going to line up and be fundamentally sound, and we're going to do this, and it's just kind of like, man, you can't be that at Vanderbilt. Where Elko showed at Wake, like Elko knows that, hey, when I don't have the players, I got to do something to neutralize that schematically.
Right.
And I think that he'll understand, hey, we got to go out and get an air raid coach, and they don't necessarily have one now, but he may say, hey, look. We got to go out and get an air raid coach or a spread coach or whatever, because we gotta schematically get to the point where we can kind of make up the talent gap. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yep.
So I think that's another reason why I would look at that and say I think it's Elko. I just think Elko's and I mean no disrespect to Clark Lee. Clark Lee's a very good football coach.
Yep.
I think Mike Elko is a better football coach, and I think Mike Elko has a little bit more of a dynamic personality to sell that'll make it more attractive, and he just has always been a more proven recruiter. Now, I think Vanderbilt's doing some nice things on the recruiting trail, actually.
Sure.
And I've been surprised by some of the pickups they've gotten. So I'm willing to have my opinion changed by that, because he also may say, look, I'm this personality. Like somebody tweeted out yesterday that Clark Lee has been talking for a long time, but he hasn't exactly said anything. And anyone that has seen Clark Lee speak publicly, like that's kind of Coach Lee. He's got a very dry personality, like very mild mannered. He may know that and say, so I've got to hire guys that are the opposite of that, and bringing in Barton Simmons, I think was a smart move for what he's asking him to do. I know one hire that I say fully support. He hired my friend Justin Lustig, which I think is a very smart special teams hire. So, so I think those are the things where I say, I think Clark Lee has an opportunity to prove me wrong. But right now I'm going to go with Mike Elko at this point in time, just because I think of all the reasons that I had said. So that's it. So Ryan, I think that's going to do it for our show today. I want to thank everybody for being a part of what we are doing. Here we go. Mace AK taking us out of here correctly. Join the message board, everybody. Hit that like button. Subscribe to this podcast. Hit that notification bell. Share this podcast. Please leave a 5-star review if you're listening via a podcast platform. Visit the Irish Breakdown store for all the cool merch that we have. And as always, go Irish. Thanks for being with us, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Tonight, 6 o'clock, IB Nation Sports Talk. Don't be late. We'll tweet that out here a little after 5 o'clock. Sean will be with us tonight. Vince is still on vacation, so it'll be Sean and I believe his son Jesse tonight will be on the show. And he said that the topic for tonight is sort of the checklist for Notre Dame's success in 2022. And he's also going to interview former Notre Dame pitcher Chris Niesel. So that will be the topics for shows tonight. So everybody check that out. And the rest of you, we will talk to you again tomorrow, 1 o'clock. We're going to talk some team stuff most likely tomorrow, as long as there's no recruiting news breaking between now and then, which we are not aware of any that's going to happen. So I have some team stuff to discuss tomorrow. And, of course, check out the irishbreakdown.com. Thanks, everybody, for being with us today on the Irish Breakdown podcast.